Good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Board. Today is Wednesday, September 18th at 9 o'clock, and I would like to call this meeting to order. Thanks, everyone, for coming back. Yesterday, we had a full day, and here we will have a fantastic discussion, so I appreciate it. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board members and staff. Today with me here is, on my left, Board Member Sean McGuire. On my right, Board Member Tam Doduck, who was just running a little late. And then to her right is Board Member Laurel Firestone. Assisting us today at the executive table is our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, our Chief Counsel, Michael Laufer, Chief Deputy Jonathan Bishop, other Chief Deputy, Eric Oppenheimer, and we have Janine Townsend, Clerk of the Board, here today, assisting us along with Courtney Tyler. I'll quickly go through the evacuation procedure. Please look around, identify the 3 exits, and in the case of a fire alarm, we're required to gather up our valuables and evacuate the room immediately. We evacuate over to Cesar Chavez Park, which is across the street. Please obey all traffic signals. I want to let you know that this meeting is being webcast and recorded, and so please speak into the microphone when you come up. And please also make sure and turn off your cell phones, any noise-making devices. With that, I think we're ready to move on to item number 11. The Division of Administrative Services is here to discuss our consideration of a proposed resolution adopting emergency regulations revising the core water quality regulatory fee schedules contained in several titles and sections and chapters. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. With me, my name is John Russell. I'm the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. With me at the table today is David Shakir, the Chief of our fee branch, and Glen Oyster, who works on the fees with us. Today, we'll be talking about the water quality fees. You want to put up the first slide? I'll just say a few words, introductory words about our friend Fiscal. And some of the difficulties we've been having, and then David and Glenn will get into the meat of the item.
For those at home, there's a notable reaction from the audience on Fiscal.
The one item that isn't up there that I'll also talk about is our cannabis fees. So we are still having trouble with Fiscal. I think we've been trying to be very transparent about the difficulties we've been having in the implementation of it. We are getting better, that our staff is learning the process. We are still having problems with the system itself. There's 2 areas that we have issues with. One is getting payments out the door. That's going fairly well right now. The other is just our normal everyday accounting procedures and end of the month closures, year-end closures. So I think we just closed period 4 or 5 out of a 12-period year. So we are behind, and this is our typical year-end period where we do a lot of our basic accounting stuff. But that's probably a topic for another day. But Fiscal does affect our fees because the reporting that we get out of Fiscal isn't as robust as we are used to in the past. In the past, we would get pretty much a monthly report of our revenues and expenditures within about 15 or 20 days after the end of the month. As I said, we're only on month 4 or 5 closure. So we're about half a year to 8 months behind on our reporting right now. And that's our labor, where we're spending our money, our revenue, where it's coming in. So that's forcing us to be a little bit more conservative, actually a lot more conservative on our recommendations today. In the past, if we said, our revenues are A and our expenditures are B, and we knew that pretty closely, we were a lot more comfortable in some of the recommendations that we could make in terms of the necessary fee increases. This time, like I said, we're being very conservative. If we think we need a 5% increase, that's our recommendation, is that we do the full 5% this year. So with that, I'll hand it over to David.
I have one question on that. Can I?
Yeah.
It sounds like the challenge is both that we have trouble getting the statements, we're still behind in getting the statements we need in terms of schedule. Is there a difference in terms of the detail that we'll be getting under Fiscal that may impact us in the future?
There is. Some of the reports that are the canned reports that Fiscal will spit out aren't as detailed or complete as we have in the past. We are working with Fiscal, the Department of Fiscal, to see if we can make some of those reports we get more robust. But yeah, it's different information than we've had in the past. So a lot of it is the change and figuring out how to work with what we've been given.
Okay. And I think my understanding is we're getting quarterly reports on just how all of these challenges with Fiscal are being addressed over time and improving over time, hopefully, in the executive officer's report on approximately a quarterly basis or every couple months.
Yeah, there was a report a month or two ago, and we'll have another one coming up. It didn't make sense to report every month because the changes aren't that rapid. But we will provide the board with information on the payment, how we're doing on our payment for the money that we get out the door, our loans and grants payments primarily, and our underground storage tank cleanup fund reimbursements, and then how we're doing on our basic accounting functions.
Okay, yeah, I know that's really important, obviously, to us and you as staff, and I think the public as well. I know there's been lots of concerns about how scheduling has been going, so appreciate that and look forward to continuing to see that in a more regular basis.
Yeah.
And we've spent a lot of time and energy trying to catch up, and we are making some progress. But I just want to note that a number of staff for months have been under mandatory overtime. We let them take Saturdays off on 3-day weekends, but we have really, really been trying to catch up with the resources we have, but it hasn't been enough so far.
Yeah, thank you.
I think what we're also going to be looking for is additional resources in order to not just clear the backlog, but start to really get back to where we were ultimately before we had to transfer over when, underground storage tank program was putting out payments in 30 days, So things that took a long time to get to, and then now we're kind of forced to address now. Anyway, thank you.
Good morning, Board Chair, fellow board members. I'll take over part of the presentation from here. Just to, again, overview this slide here. As John mentioned, he went over our fiscal issues we're dealing with. We'll also go over our budget cost drivers, recent program fee increases, our stakeholder outreach throughout the year, major program changes in our fee schedules, and then other fee schedule changes that we're also proposing today. And as John mentioned, we'll have a discussion on the cannabis program. So basically what we're looking here is these are the budget cost drivers, and this is a chart that we show the stakeholders each year, go through the process, and it basically drives us, it shows us basically how we got from our budget from fiscal year 18-19 to our budgetary allocation for fiscal year 19-20. Basically what drives our costs, of course, is there's the employee compensation side of the house, the healthcare, the retirement portion, and then if there are any approved BCPs throughout the year. And there were two. One was for $1.8 million for the wildfire mitigations, which was for SB 901. And then there was also $500,000, about $525,000 increase to our sewer service provision for disadvantaged communities. And along with that, there was an adjustment basically for space optimization. As many of you guys know, a couple years ago, there was a budget change proposal approved that basically, for all funds, took a portion of adjusting the space here in the Cal EPA building, excuse me. And basically what happened though this year, now they're making the adjustments. So this was actually kind of a negative amount that was taken out of the budget, and it had adjustments to all of our core programs. This is a slide I really want to have a little discussion about here. What I'll point to you is the pinkish color. I think on our screen it's a little more in the pinkish color. It's there in the middle. It's the fiscal year 2018-19 required increase and then the adopted increase. Last year, staff took to you a fee schedule, and basically we explained what the required increase would be. So as an example, the waste discharge requirement program, the WDR program, needed an 18.6% increase. However, we were looking at our fund, we had reserve throughout the stakeholder process. We threw out the option where, well, we could raise fees the full amount, or we can look at using some of the reserve to help offset. And so basically, we offset about 9.1% of that 18.6. And so the board adopted a fee of 9.5% last year. However, and as we mentioned to the stakeholders, that 9.1% expenditures, that doesn't go away, right? It's just deferred. So when you move over and you start looking at kind of the light greenish there for fiscal year 1920, there's the prior year deferral of the 9.1%. And then as we move over, it says fiscal year 1920 additional needed. That's what the fee would be just in this fiscal year, basically, or at least the cost that we're driving 1920. And as you can see, other than the water quality cert, it's in range of 3 to 6%, basically. However, when you, again, add the deferral amount, you'll see the increases in that second to the right column there, where the WDR program needs a 14.8% increase. Our land disposal and stormwater programs, those are programs, again, where revenue is matching or just a little exceeding our expenditures. So at this point, we're not recommending any increases there. So again, this is not all of the, again, not all of this, most of this increase is coming from the deferrals from last year. And so just to kind of point out kind of what John mentioned with the fiscal and not fully knowing our expenditure and revenue data, where in the past we'd be able to look at that and see if we can take some of that and help offset these costs. But as John mentioned, we're being really conservative this year, and we're assessing the fee at its full amount to cover the full cost. So moving into stakeholder outreach, we had a pretty extensive outreach this year, and I won't go into all these dates, but we had our normal 3 stakeholder meetings, which come after each iteration of the governor's budget. So when the Jan 10th May revised and enacted budget, following up, we go out and we talk to the stakeholders if there's any, again, adjustments in the budgets. We definitely, of course, with the wildfire mitigation, SB 901, we definitely got the utility companies involved. We met a little bit later in the year just because of, we had to wait for the legislation to pass. But we, had the discussions with the utility companies. The water code determination, this had to do with desalination. We had multiple meetings with these groups. And prior to this, even in last fiscal year, program staff and internally were having discussions going on about, again, adopting a fee for the desal fee schedule, Ag lands definitely had multiple meetings. There were 6 meetings there, along with just bringing in individual stakeholders, groups that came in, wanted to kind of discuss the updates and offer opinions. Confined animal feeding fee schedule. We did basically a roadshow, and I just want to say, kind of tip my hat to Glen here because he took a big role in this and going out and meeting with a lot of these different groups. And with the confined animal feeding, it's interesting because when you go to the North Coast versus the Central Valley, of course they're dealing with a lot of different issues. So, but Glen will probably get into this, but these stakeholder meetings really kind of flushed things out, and pretty much the stakeholders kind of gave us options of how we could adjust it, and we think it's going to work as we're moving forward on this outreach. So with that said, we'll start moving into some of the core changes that we're looking at doing for the water quality fees.
Good morning. So the first of the 3 major programs I'm going to discuss today is related to the water quality certification. A lot of people call it the 401 CERT program. Specifically, there's 2 parts. The first one is related to the wildfire mitigation plans. It's a long list of entities here: electrical corporations, electric utilities, and electrical cooperatives. So combined, I'm just going to generally say utility companies are required to file the wildfire mitigation plans. As David mentioned, there was a BCP approved The BCP is more for than just the WDPF, Waste Discharge Permit Fund. If I get my numbers right, I think there's 13 PYs that are for the forestry and timber program that does not apply to this, and 9 PYs specifically for this program that will be funded by fees. So those 9 PYs comes out to about $1.8 million of costs. As most of you are aware, we do have foundational program costs that have to be funded as well. So we add in roughly about a 30% addition, which is the $500,000 for costs. So we're looking to recoup about $2.3 million of revenue from the targeted utility companies. As David mentioned, we did have conference calls, again, late in the process. It was just last month to talk about different alternatives for collecting these fees. Make sure we're over. We did receive one comment letter related to this. I'll get to that in a moment. So the fee options that were discussed, primarily, number one, there was 2 different metrics, but both are based off of miles. So 1A was statewide transmission miles for the utility companies. So it's just a global number that we can base a metric on. And then 1B is the number of miles identified in high risk or high threat. After proposing that, the stakeholder community came back, and their primary preference was to go with a flat per project fee. We have a lot of uncertainty because of the $2.3 million. Is setting a fee on a project, if we have a year where the number of projects come in are a lot less than what we had anticipated, we wouldn't be able to fund the program. So we're looking for a very stable fee process so we can get that consistent fee year over year to support the staff workload. So basing it on the transmission miles, it's a consistent amount that we know we can recoup the costs and manage the program in a better state. So staff is recommending option 1B. As I indicated before, we do have one comment letter that came in. It's a long name, so the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. So I believe they call it CEEB, C-C-E-E-B. Their primary, sorry, I want to make sure I get my notes here. So their primary issue is that they believe the number of PYs, or they're previously identified as 9 PYs, is excessive for the amount of work here. They feel that more realistically 2 or 3 PYs is needed for this type of work, and conversely, the amount of fee would be a lot less under what they're proposing as the number of staff for this. I'm not sure if there's going to be any comments later on this, but again, staff feels that the workload is out there, and if we have more technical questions, we do have staff here able to address that. Moving on to the next slide. So separate from the SB 901 fees, we do have fee increases for the other fee payers within the program. The first bullet point up here, we've had a lot of change in this program over the last 3 or 4 years. So back in fiscal year 14-15, we established an annual fee for this program. 2 years ago, for fiscal year 17-18, we made some changes to our structure. And every time we make a change, it takes, I used to say 2 years to see the benefit of that, but it's more like 3 to 4 to 5 years before you can see the consistency of the changes. The biggest change we'd made is the second bullet point under the first section. We removed what's called the per linear feet fee from the fill and excavation projects. For those that are familiar with the program, flood control districts are very long and narrow features. The amount of fee that they were paying was understood by program staff to be higher than what it needed to be, so we decided to remove that metric and just base them off the acreage. So it did reduce their fee. I will talk about a comment letter we received on that as well. So with all the changes that have been going on, this is a program that it's been a struggle, to be honest with you, getting the revenue in to meet the expenditures. Because of all the changes, we haven't had a really consistent balancing point to set our fees or make sure we have the right mechanisms. So we're constantly reviewing this with program staff. But again, every major change we take takes a couple of years to flesh out. For this program, again, separate from the SB 901 fees, they need a 19% increase. So for all programs, with the exception of fill and excavation, we're recommending to raise the fees 19%. Within the fill and excavation, we're tweaking it a little bit. We're going to recommend that the annual fee for those fees does not change, so we keep it as it is this year. We do increase what we consider called the application and project maximum by the 19%. And then the change really is in the increasing the project fee impact area by 19.9% to offset the fact that we're not going to raise the annual fees. So we're balancing out the costs within the program. We're just not doing it evenly for all the metrics. So the comment letter we received regarding the fees from the flood control districts. Sorry, I've got to change my page here. Again, as I mentioned before, the flood control districts are do the maintenance activities on existing flood control facilities. They feel that the staff time is less intensive for this type of work compared to other certifications, and that the fees they pay for that is excessive compared to the other certifications. They have acknowledged that their fees have dropped when we made the change, removing the linear portion of the fee, but they still feel that their fees are higher than they should be based off of the staff workload. I'm going to hand it over to David here because we've been in conversations with at least one of the flood control districts, but we are going to be working on the next year on some additional outreach.
So it's been about a month ago, but yeah, the Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District did reach out to us, and we've had a couple of phone calls, and I asked, if they'd be interested, kind of, developing a work group, and we can get program staff involved. Again, as Glen mentions, a lot of it has to do with figuring out if really the workload and the fee associated workload is kind of meeting that demand, basically. And they agreed upon it. They also were going to get me some names and contacts, which are in the process of. And so I'm hoping, into September, early October, we're going to start the ball rolling on this process, get program staff, get Division Water Quality staff involved, and start kind of just looking at the numbers and, move forward with the work group.
So with that, I'm going to move on to the next program, which is the NPDES program specific to water code determinations. Generically, we call this the desal facilities. So there is applications that come in that require the determination. They require significant staff time and take multiple years to complete the process. Estimated over $1.5 million of staff time is spent per year working on this, and we're not collecting any revenue to support that workload. So we have talked with the stakeholders, and we are proposing what's listed here in the second bullet point, an annual application fee. It can actually be called an annual determination fee that they'll pay annually while they're going through the determination process. Once their permit is adopted and they're going live in the facility, then they move over to our normal NPDES flow-based fee. As David indicated, we did meet with them throughout the summertime to talk about a fee structure related to this work. They do understand that there is a need for them to pay for staff time. There is some differences on our recommendation on how to get the fee and what they would like to see the fee based off of. So the options considered, option one, when staff first went out and kind of polled the regions on the amount of work that they're doing related to this activity, they saw a difference in the type of intake for the facility, surface versus, I'm just going to call the subsurface, but there are also combined or alternative intakes. It's about a 3-to-1 ratio in amount of time. Some regions it's more 4 times higher to review a surface alternative intake versus a subsurface. So through the analysis with the number of anticipated facilities, we came up with option one to charge an annual determination fee of $62,500 for surface types and the $187,500 for the alternative or surface types. The industry came back to us. Their preference is to not differentiate between the intake type. They prefer just to have a base fee regardless of the type of facility and then do a flow or volumetric base component. It's actually very similar to the facilities that are online for the NPDES program. There's a base fee and there's a volumetric. Option three was just thrown out there as kind of a hybrid between the two. It wasn't really discussed much. It's kind of an in-between. It's sort of a 2-to-1 relationship. It does recognize differences between surface and subsurface, but also does have a volumetric component as well. With all that, staff does feel that for the amount of work, the intake type does determine how much staff workload there is. The water plan, I believe is what it's called, does indicate that subsurface is the required technology. If it's not able to be done, that's where you go through the determination process of validating the other types of alternative technology. So it takes a lot longer if someone is doing a determination that's different than subsurface. So our recommendation is option 1. The stakeholder community prefers option 2. Okay, yeah, and then thanks, David. Then we did get one comment from the Cal DSAL, which is a group that works with a lot of these facilities, basically saying that they prefer option number 2, that it should be based solely on the volume of the site and that the nature of the intake doesn't impact staff work. But as I previously indicated, staff does say the type of intake does impact significantly the amount of workload.
So both the SB 901 fees and the DSAL fees were 2 areas where we did our typical stakeholder outreach, but we couldn't come to our goal of compromise or consensus on it. So our proposals for those, or recommendations for those 2 fees are distinctly different from what the stakeholders want.
And the third program that we had a lot of work on, David mentioned we had, I think it was 6 meetings this year. This Conversations, as most of you know, we've been going on for 2, probably in our 3rd year now, looking at a different type of fee structure or looking to lower a fee for certain types of activities. The 2 or 3 years ago, we tried to work through it, but we could never come to an agreement. This past year, program staff took a different look at it and basically put together a proposal initially based off of the irrigation and nitrogen management plan called the INMP, and also a pesticide toxicity management plan, the PTMP. So those 2 requirements, if you didn't have to do one or both of those, then you would pay a lower fee. I'm going to have David switch over to the next slide. So we have 3 different options because of the information. They're on all different slides. But the first option that we presented, again, combines both the INMP and the PTMP. It's a convoluted look at setting fees. The main takeaway from here is there was a lot of uncertainty from the regional water boards and from the regulated community on the amount of staff workload it was going to take to maintain all these and do yearly validations. It was generally perceived as being a little too difficult for us to implement. So with that in mind, staff came back with option 2. So this one narrowed it down just to the INMP component. Primarily, the East San Joaquin order requires this unless certain groups are exempted. Cal Rice is one, managed wetlands and irrigated pasture lands don't have to do these activities. So the thought process here is since they don't have to do those types of activities, they should pay a lower fee. The fee amounts here, the primary one we're going to look at is the under group enrollment, the $1.08 and the 87 cents. Those reflect the fee increases needed for this year. If we back it out, the current past year fee for group enrollment was 95 cents. If we don't factor in a fee increase, just to kind of put it in like comparisons, those fees will go up 2 cents to 97. So the difference is a 2 cent for most growers have to pay in order for those in Group B, again, Cal Rice, irrigated pasture, managed wetlands, to receive a 20% fee discount. So these numbers are kind of hard to relate in the 95 cents, but I did want to show that what the relationship was in like dollars versus the fee increases that are needed as well. And then the individual enrollment is just individuals pay roughly right now 15 to 30 times higher fees, and these numbers here represent that as well. So with that, through the discussions with our fee stakeholders, we came up with option 3. I'm generically saying this is a little more simplified method versus number 2. It's called Define Agricultural Activities. The same groups I already mentioned, those that belong to Cal Rice, managed wetlands, and irrigated pasture. It's the same data set right now for both of these. But over time, as the regional water boards that were not part of the East San Joaquin order, as they go in and modify the orders to meet the requirements of the East San Joaquin order. Some other entities and other regions may be exempted from certain activities or requirements. And if that's adopted at that time, then they would be subject to the lower fee as well. So it gives the regional water boards a little more freedom to determine, based off their permits, who falls in certain types of activities. So with all that, we are recommending option 3. The community, I'm going to say, they may not like the fact that some fees have to go up, but there's general acknowledgement that this is the best option to go forward. They do recognize that some should be paying less. It means they're going to pay a little bit more. So although they don't want to pay more, they understand that this is the best method to go forward with. We did receive one comment from Cal Rice, that big surprise, they're in agreement with this, as their fees will go down. So anything on that? Okay. And the last few things I'm going to talk about before I hand it back over to David are other, what I call small, minor changes. The impacts are fairly minuscule for most fee payers. The first one belongs to the stormwater program related to the MS4, or the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems. We're adding some clarifying language related to special districts. What this means is there are a couple of areas, there's one or two where there's no one within an area paying a fee for the MS4 permit. So this allows us to charge a fee for special districts. Right now, that in our language said they don't pay a fee. So it's just a correction of some language to make sure we are capturing fees in areas that we're not capturing fees today. The next one down is confined animals. As David said, we went out to a number of different locations this past year. We had started out looking at a fee structure to change it significantly to an animal equivalent unit. Through all of our discussions, most of those who attended the meetings or we got comments from didn't like the change, wanted to stay with what they are. And as John has mentioned before, that's the nature of why we do our stakeholder outreach. Sometimes we'll throw something out there for discussion, and in this case, it wasn't something that the community wanted, and we were okay with not making any changes. The only real change we're going to do is we have certain language in our fee schedule that's in parentheses. It's called not at a dairy. We have this situation where if someone is regulated as a dairy with maybe 1 or 2 milking cows, they don't pay a fee, which is part of our schedule, and we're fine with that. But they may have 400, 500, 2,000 heifers on site. By striking out that language, we'll be able to move them over and charge them our heifer fee, and right now we can't do that. So it's an equity issue. There's probably only 4 or 5 facilities that will have to pay a fee because of this. And then we're tweaking some of the ranges of our fee numbers specific to heifers to bring them in line with a regional board. Our Central Valley just adopted a bovine order, so it puts it in line with the language they have in their order. We did receive one written comment from Dairy Cares. Summarize, they oppose any fee increase whatsoever related to dairies. They bring up that we have a regulation that we have to consider the fact that they have a pricing mechanism that they can't change. They argue that they cannot just pass on any fee increase because they can't change their fees. We did bring it up, if not in all the meetings. I can't say I said it in every single meeting, but I know the intent was to talk about all the meetings I did this past year. We did mention we understand they can't raise their fees, but we've always said that our costs are going up as well. The big change for this year, if I can have David go back to the recent program fee increase slide. Sorry, it's back quite a few. Yeah. So I know this is a hard graph to see, but the confined animal one, the second from the bottom, if you go over to the second column from the right, the fiscal year 2019-20 required increase, or actually you can use the proposed increase, it's 19.5. So other programs that need fee increases this year, it is the lowest, and that does take into account that the bovine order specifically in Central Valley has regulated facilities. They're starting to do the application fees and start paying annual fees. So we've always said that as new facilities get permitted in this program, you're going to start seeing more revenue come in. It's taken a long time to get there, but this does reflect that we are seeing other activities come in besides just the dairies. Thanks, David. did I say 19.5? I apologize. 9.5. A little slip of the tongue there. Everything else is double digits, so I guess I threw that in there. So again, Dairy Cares opposes the fee increase specific to dairies. They feel that any increase should be borne by the other members or other fee payers within the confined animals. That's the heifer lots or any type of facility other than dairies should see the fee increase. And as David mentioned before, there's two programs that we're not proposing any fee increases this year. That's the land disposal program and stormwater. Both of them have projected revenue, and as John mentioned before, because of FisCal, it's very difficult for me to validate some of my projections this year, but we do feel we have just enough revenue, or it slightly exceeds expenditures, generally in the 2 to 4% range. We did have a meeting in August where the stormwater group asked, why aren't you lowering or reducing the fee for stormwater if you're collecting more revenue? And I said it's just a comfort for me that I kind of look, once we get to maybe a 5% variance, we would look to do a 1-year discount. Their number is close that we could, but in a year where all other programs other than land disposal are setting fee increases and our uncertainty on our projections, I just don't feel comfortable enough giving them a discount just in case our forecasts are off a little bit. And the final bullet point is the federal facilities. They currently get a reduction related to monitoring costs. This is for a legal item that came through. So every couple of years, we look to potentially reevaluate what their discount is. We changed it last year. We didn't do it this year. We'll probably look to maybe reduce the federal discount next year, depending on how it looks, but we're not looking to change the federal discount this year. And the other point before David moves on is sorry, I lost my train of thought there. All of the surcharges that we have in our fee schedule, we're not proposing any changes to any of the surcharges. So if someone's currently today paying a $10,000 surcharge, the surcharge is going to remain at $10,000. It's just the base or the metric fee that we're proposing fee increases for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about cannabis and some issues we have there.
So let's talk a little bit about our cannabis fees. This is the first time in the last 4 or 5 years since we've really been charging fees that we've come up short in any one of our given programs. And in other words, our projections just didn't meet what was going to happen. So, and that wasn't limited to just us. We had anticipated when we first got the program a couple years ago to have about 15,000 enrollees in the program, and that was a combined statewide across the state. And that estimate was used by us, by Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Food and Agriculture when we did our BCPs and went to the legislature and said that's about the workload that we're going to be seeing. So that didn't come about. We actually ended up with about 5,000 enrollees in the program, and the other state agencies are in a similar boat. So it's a statewide phenomenon that, our projections were a little bit too rosy than what actually happened. And why that happened was nobody foresaw that some of the counties, actually most of the counties, would actually ban cannabis cultivation within their county. So we'll look at a map in a minute, but because the enrollments are down, from 15,000 to 5,000, the revenues are down as well. So we were projecting revenues of about 18 million to cover our expenditures of about 18 million. In actuality, we're going to be collecting about 5 million in fees. So there's obviously some imbalance there between our revenues and our expenditures. So if you look at the map, and this is a draft map, it's not complete yet. We're programming, and David and his staff are still gathering data. But the red highlighted counties are all the ones that are banned. The green are permissive, meaning that they allow cannabis cultivation. But a lot of the permissive counties also have a limit on the number of cultivators allowed within their counties. So it didn't quite turn out to be the second California gold rush that everybody was anticipating. And then the blue counties are counties that are permissive, but they allow indoor cultivation only. So as I said, we have, if the program is fully staffed, which it pretty much is, we had a decision 2 or 3 years ago when we got the program. Do we phase it up gradually to accommodate the permits coming in, or do we hire staff? Because essentially the workload was already there. There were a number of growers across the state. We knew the growers were there. We knew the environmental impacts were happening. So we made the decision as an organization, let's staff up immediately, get people out in the field, get people enrolled, get people inspected, do what we were supposed to be doing. So at a fully staffed program, like I said, our expenditures are about $18 million, and about $5 million of that, again, is for the foundational programs. All our fee payers pay, or all of our fee programs support our foundational programs. So as I said before, there's a deficit there in the program. We started some conversations with the governor's office and the Department of Finance on how we were going to cover that deficit. They provided us with an additional $6.5 million from the Cannabis Tax Fund, which we had previously had an existing $1.5 million in that tax fund. So that comes out to $8 million of additional support. The good news is that $8 million in additional support fully supports our cannabis program. We don't take the foundational money out of that. So I guess that's also the bad news, is that we don't take the money out of that to support our foundational programs. So because of that, we basically end up with a deficit in our foundational programs support of about $3.4 million. So we have several choices. Why don't you go to the next slide? We can increase the existing fees, or the fees that Glen just talked about, to fully provide support, that additional support to the foundational programs that is lacking because of the reduced fee revenue in the cannabis program. That's option C. Or we could do something in between, or we could just do no change at all. The fees would be as we proposed them today, just as you heard from Glen. The prudent option would be, fiscally at least, to do option B, increase them slightly, not cover the full impact. We're not recommending that at this time. And the reason we're not recommending this is the discussions we were having with the Department of Finance and the governor's office came so late in our stakeholder process that we really didn't have any time to get out before the stakeholders and say, oh, by the way, there's this shortfall in the cannabis program, and the foundational programs funding is going to be affected as some collateral effects. So, that's the reason we are not recommending option C, is we haven't had that opportunity to discuss this with the fee payers. One of the things we've been doing in the last 4 or 5 years is really focusing on our stakeholder program in the terms of being as open and transparent as we can. I think the previous slides showed all of the meetings we've had this year, and we don't want to torpedo or undermine those efforts by suddenly coming to this meeting this late in the game and springing that on the fee payers. Option B, like I said, would be prudent. It's a little bit of an increase, about a 2% increase for most of the programs. Or the other option that you have is to not increase the fees at all, just adopt them as we described them a few minutes ago. That would mean that we would have to do some very careful management of our vacancies. We could do that. It would be a little bit painful for some of our programs, because it's going to be a loss of 20 staff in the WDPF-funded programs. But we do have 2,000 employees in the water board, approximately, a little bit more than that now. Our vacancy rates are typically around 7 to 9 at the highest. Our goal, of course, is to drive them down to 0, because we've been given staff and money to do certain things, so we want to hire to do those things. But in practical terms, we really cannot drive our vacancy rate down below 3 to 4%. It just, with the typical churn of staff leaving or transferring. That's about as low as we can get. So if we drive it down to about a 5% vacancy rate, that's still about 100 vacancies, board-wide, all of our programs that we can manage. So it would be manageable. There would be some pain involved. And we would need to, like I said, we'd have to be very prudent about how we do that to both minimize the impacts to our individual programs and then to our individual organizations within the board. So this is a little odd one that we don't really have a recommendation. Typically, I come up here and I'm fully prepared to say you should do, or I recommend that you do this. But in this case, we're saying option A or option B, or we can do either one. But we're not recommending option C simply because, again, we don't want to undermine our stakeholder efforts.
So in closing, moving forward into next fiscal year, first bullet point, I mentioned this, and I'll be mentioning this in the other agenda items later today, that for next fiscal year, we can estimate anywhere between a 3 to 6% annual increase in staff costs. The normal employee compensation, the unions negotiations, that's all out of our hands. And we get guidance from the Department of Finance, and these costs get spread out to all the funds. So again, we're looking at an estimated 3 to 6% annual increase. And again, this is prior to any BCPs or legislations that may be expected. Definitely fee development or to be reviewed. As you guys are aware of, program staff is working on the winery journal order, and we'll be working side by side with them on developing a fee structure and a fee schedule to go along with that journal order. So we'll be setting up meetings and working in line with program staff. As I mentioned earlier, the flood control districts will be working on the 401 CERT fee structure, and so we'll be moving forward on some fee structures there, discussions. Potential fee adjustment for regionalization efforts in the MS4 stormwater program. This was brought to our attention from the North Coast region, Region 1, the Russian River Watershed Association. A gentleman by the name of Andy Rogers had brought up, looked at basically having one MS4 permit for activities in that area instead of having multiple permits. And just looking at if that actually did reduce staff time. And the region did come back to us and said that there was some staff time reduction. It was ranging about 7%, and could that result in a fee reduction? However, our process is not just look at the schedule for just the region, but statewide. And we've reached out to the other regions, and they basically said they don't really see the need of the reduction of staff time, and then of course that resulting in a reduction in fees. But we want to continue these discussions and continue doing the research. And so again, we'll be looking at this issue further. Again, our normal stakeholder meetings based on when the budgets are released. Again, managing our fund conditions. Once the Jan 10th budget comes out, and we'll be working closely internally with our budget office and the Department of Finance. And just finally here, future annual meeting notifications. This year and in years past, we send out a postcard, and we send about 40,000 of those. And so you can kind of imagine the cost of sending out this postcard on the notification. And again, as you're aware of, last minute things happen where dates may change and things like that. So it makes it a little difficult for us to pull those cards or resend them out, of course. And so we're going to opt to add an insert into our annual invoices, and we'll probably do this multiple times, basically providing information and links to our Lyris list to sign up to get further information about our board meetings and workshops for fees and our stakeholder process.
So with that wraps up our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Thank you, staff. We have a number of comment cards. Do we want to go to that before questions, or?
Yeah, thanks. So for the stakeholder meetings, they start after the Jan 10 budget. And I assume the focus of the stakeholder meetings are proposed budget and fee schedule, how much do we link in? I know there's been a lot of efforts to, and we do an annual performance report and metrics to look at performance of how we're meeting all of our requirements and legal requirements and goals for the different regulatory programs. How do we discuss that piece of how we can improve efficiencies and performance within programs? I'm assuming that's not the focus of the fee stakeholder meetings, but I'm wondering if that's an opportunity to also reflect on efficiencies and improve and performance that we can do with those budgets, since that's the purpose of the budgets.
Yeah, you are correct that that's not, or at least it wasn't our original intent of our fee stakeholder meetings, but the stakeholders themselves are very interested in that aspect. How can we improve cost of compliance? And then some very pointed questions about how many staff do you have in a program? Exactly what are those staff doing? What are the outputs? And we do point them to the performance report as a good report card for that. But that is something that everybody is very interested in. How can we do more with less?
Yeah.
And in turn drive our fees down?
So I guess and since I haven't been here a whole year, I'm also just wondering, how do we usually go over, we put all this effort into tracking performance metrics and putting our annual report together. Do we hold an information session on that?
Yes, we do,
usually?
and you will
Okay.
be seeing it in November. For last year, we do a two-part process that you haven't seen yet, but the first part is we go over with each of the regions and the divisions their targets for the upcoming year and their accomplishments for the past year, and look at discrepancies between the targets and the and try and understand if they had both a large increase above what they targeted, what was going on, and maybe we should be setting our targets more realistically to address that increase, or if they've missed their targets for some reason, what are the reasons for that? It's not really a taking someone to the woodshed kind of activity. It's really informational and really talking through each of there's both targets, and then there's all sorts of tracking on performance that is not a target, because we don't put targets on everything that we do. We track lots and lots of stuff, and we target very specific things. And so we look at both of those. You'll see the performance in, as I said, in November. It's a roll-up of all the annual, and we do it as a information item in front of the board. But myself, Eileen, and Awima go through with meetings with each of the divisions and regions to go through on a much more detailed analysis of the past year. So.
Great. I'm really looking forward to that. I appreciate that. I know there's so much time and effort that goes into that process, so it's helpful to know that we have time to go over that. And I look forward to that process, and I hope that there's some engagement from stakeholders in that process too, because I think that's, the point of having it as an information item, obviously for us, but also for the public and dischargers to also be able to engage on that and make sure that, they're able to understand how performance is in their particular focus areas and bring out those, because I think one of the challenges that I see structurally with this fee setting process is that the budget and performance process is kind of separated timeline-wise from the fee schedule process, which is just the nature of our budget and fee timelines. But it does make it important to then make sure we're engaging those other parts of the year. But, in terms of providing input into the budget and efficiencies and performance.
So there's a couple things that I want to highlight for you. One is that we don't get a lot of input on the performance at the information item, but we do get a lot of people looking at it. because it's online and it's updated online, and people do go and hit that and look at how those are happening. We also, last year, reinvigorated the cost of compliance. We did a pretty thorough on MPDS a number of years ago, and we didn't get a lot of engagement on some of our other programs. We're re-engaged on that with folks to see where we can find. I would also remind that it's important to remember that we are not this is not a cost recovery fee for service model, and so we don't spend a lot of time saying, well, we did 28 inspections, that cost X amount of money, and that's how much you should be charged, because our programs don't capture everything that we do. All the stakeholder meetings, all the other things that we do are not fee for service. And so it is a little bit of a disconnect between our allocated positions and budget and our performance, but they are combined in the performance report to show how we're doing on that.
Yeah, I guess, I think this is also just for stakeholders and maybe for the stakeholder process, but I think really encouraging, because the comments and valid concerns around, do we really need this kind of staff increase and cost increase, I think is directly also related to how are we performing with the staff that we have and accomplishing our goals. And so I think encouraging real engagement with stakeholders in those efforts is helpful. Even I totally agree that this isn't, it's not an exact fee-for-service model, but I think in the goals of having transparency, which obviously I think is a huge value that I know staff and the board have and is incredibly important in this type of fee structure. It's also helpful to get that other side so that there's opportunity for input on that. And I'm sure that stakeholders will take opportunities outside of that process, but I think that's a really constructive time and process to maybe discuss some of those things too.
And I would be negligent if I didn't say that we've never had a program that's been supported at the level that would be required to actually implement everything we're supposed to do. And so it isn't a question of we have excess staff that don't have work because we've become too efficient. What happens is we become efficient in inspections, we can switch some staff over to things that haven't been
Right.
Done that
Right.
should be done.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the difficulty comes in, and certainly this being the third fee discussion I've had, is that we do set our fees on a yearly basis, and there does need to be a very robust discussion around how to divvy that up, how best to, but that is at the tail end. And what I have seen over these last years is continued effort and discussion about how best to have that policy discussion that we know stakeholders want. They want to be able to say, well, what is your rationale? What BCPs are you going to be pursuing? What positions? What are what is your what are your priorities? And I think that we're looking to continue to be more transparent and open and have those opportunities for engagement, but also focus then on particular projects. Cost of compliance. I think that oftentimes, particularly in the fee discussion, we hear, sort of death by 1,000 cuts, regulatory entity coming, raising our fees, but our fees, we need to exist as an entity. We need to be able to do the work of the state on water quality, water rights, and drinking water. And so it becomes a little difficult to talk about policy in the context at the tail end of the fees. And so what I've encouraged actually is to not mix a policy discussion with the fee discussion, keep it focused to how to best split the pie, but then let's start to continue to expand and have those opportunities to engage with stakeholders on what are our priorities as a state? How do we continue to engage? And I think that the executive order process and discussions around the water resilience portfolio has allowed a continued sort of space, that sort of policy space. What are we going to focus on as a board and as stakeholders and communities here? And so I think that we'll definitely continue to embrace that. That's what we are as a board. We're, as we all know, nothing but public process here. So, there is that strong desire. I hear that often. We want not just to have a fee discussion, we want a policy discussion with you and be able to say, should you be having those people in those programs? And it is that balancing act. And I'm here to embrace it. So I appreciate you being a champion for that as well.
Well,
Board
yeah,
Member
and
Watershed.
I guess I think this is helpful for me understanding where we build in an opportunity for some of those policy discussions. I know that we've had some when we're adopting programs. So for a program-specific one, that's a timeline. I think where we have, setting time around performance metrics and reports is another one. One thing, and I'm not sure where there's opportunity for public discussion on this. There may not be, but because the budget process is really over at the legislature. But I often wonder now that I'm on this side of the dais, just, where there might be opportunities for example, system improvements and data system improvements that could improve the outcomes that that staff are working really hard to achieve, but are having to spend a lot more staff time on because of outdated data systems and processes, which I know is a challenge probably throughout state government, and one that is not unnoticed and obviously is a major priority of the chair. So, but, I share that. I think we want, ideally we don't just keep always adding people, but we also are looking at adding capacity in terms of our systems, because I think that creates real efficiencies and better uses the expertise that we have on staff as well.
And we agree, but there are trade-offs in all of these things that you have to keep in mind, and I want to outline two of them. When we have the kind of the base program fee that we talked about, well, adding IT capacity increases that program fee, across the board. So we have to keep that in mind. Should also keep in mind that we tend to provide lots of options and alternatives in our policies and our permits for people to do things that are not one size fits all. Every one of those additions add staff. I think you see a good example of that in the desal program, where providing that opportunity to look at surface intakes has increased the cost that we incur doing that. We would not need that excess increase if we said, only subsurface intakes. We would reduce that cost dramatically. That's just an example. We do that in almost everything that we adopt because it's responsive to the stakeholders, but it does cost us more money.
Thank you for that discussion. I'd like to start calling folks up. First speaking is Andy Rogers from the Russian River Watershed Association, who will be followed by Tim Johnson from California Rice and Bob Gore from the Welco Group. Good morning.
Good morning, board members. Andy Rogers, Executive Director of the Russian River Watershed Association. Thanks for hearing me today and having this hearing. I've been working with staff over here, been very helpful, and as I'm going to describe a little bit, been working very closely with Region 1 on some of these initiatives that I'm going to mention and was mentioned earlier. The Russian River Watershed Association is an association of 11 public agencies in the Russian River, and our boundary of jurisdiction is the watershed boundary. We've been closely coordinating on all kinds of water quality and water supply related initiatives, as well as wastewater. And 20 years ago, I would say the relationship of our agencies with the Regional Water Board was not a positive experience. Since then, we've been working very, very hard to collaborate and pull everybody together, and I'm happy to say that now in 2019, we have a very solid collaboration that was very hard-earned, and the Regional Water Board is, we consider, a very close partner, not just in compliance, but in programs and development moving forward. So including the stormwater permit, we appreciate the fees not moving at this time. I just want to propose an initiative moving forward, and it was briefly alluded to. We'd like the board to support staff to continue working with us to develop a fee incentive for regions that collaborate like we do. And we have voluntarily organized around a watershed context, and we have created benefits for our member agencies in streamlining, consistency, a lot of very much of a cost benefit to our agencies. And we've seen the members of the public able to engage. We have our elected officials engaged. So it's been a very net positive experience. I'll also mention that the regional board has experienced efficiencies as a result of. So we have consolidated deliverables. We have a forum for them to engage with all of our members in one place in a public setting. So there's lots of benefits realized, and it was already alluded to, they are seeing cost efficiencies. One thing that I want to mention going forward is, as other entities are being named, such as school districts in particular, but there's some others, non-traditionals, they don't know really where they're going to go. We've been talking, they've been reaching out to us saying, okay, if we are named under the stormwater permit in the future, we're going to need some foundational help. We can offer that, but there's a cost to that. There's a cost to us helping them. We want to help them. So what we're asking is the state board provide us a platform so we can talk to our elected officials whose jurisdictions are just a subset of the watershed. We want to be able to say there's value in this collaboration, not just in what is happening regionally, but there's value directly to your districts because the state is recognizing your fee, that you're providing a benefit that's in line with state board priorities and our Regional 1 priorities. So what we're asking is that as other folks are named, we want to bring them into the tent, and we want to help them, and we want the school districts to not really have a terrible experience with this. We want it to be a positive experience. We have childhood outreach requirements. We want to see if we can implement those together. But we need some incentive to tell our elected leaders and our opinion leaders of why we're doing this. It's not just because it's a good thing and it feels good, but there's real fiscal benefits. We want to be able to say that those savings, that if they are in line with everybody's priorities, the state and the region, that we can fold those costs into enhancing our programs. We want to be able to tell that story. So we want the state to be at the table for that, and we would appreciate your support to ask staff to continue to work with us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really, I think, interesting and impressive and important model. So I look forward to following up on that.
Thank you. Tim Johnson from California Rice Commission and Bob Gore from the Gualco Group, who will then be followed by Paul Kelly from Cal DSAL. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Well, good morning, Chair Escobar and the rest of the board members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. Tim Johnson, President and CEO of the California Rice Commission. We represent the state's 2,500 rice farmers and the 40-plus rice sellers and millers, and of course, manage the rice waste discharge requirement. I really have two comments for you today. The first is where I'll spend the majority of my time, is in support for the proposed tiered fee schedule for agriculture option 3 that staff presented. We think it represents a fair and transparent approach based on the level of regulatory costs and resources that are required. It also importantly, and we've been an advocate from the beginning of making sure that we equally share in the common costs of the agency. And finally, really a lot of the last work of the last months as this option came forward, it's very easy to identify and implement, right, for the regional boards. And that was an important, I think, element. We might have worked ourselves into a position where it was difficult for the regional boards. And so I think that extra discussion and the extra enhancements were helpful. I think also I would note that this does represent significant compromise on behalf of the agricultural community. 2 years when we came before you, it was difficult. It was easy to see winners and losers. And the course of the last year in particular, we're really able to come to a position where you don't have a lot of opposition letters in front of you on this. And just want to thank my agricultural colleagues for sticking with us through all of those meetings. Finally, I just want to note outstanding job by your staff. I know you hear that a lot. There's two I want to call out, Brianna St. Pierre and Glen Osterhage, and Hae-Joo, and I never get all that right, but it's Glen. Really did an outstanding job. This was hard, right? The slide that was up there, it was us and the other ag folks, right? The confined animal feeding that really had the most stakeholder meetings. It's not lost on me. It's probably us, not you. But having said that, they stuck with it and they came up with a lot of different options, right? We didn't like stuff. We went back and looked at additional options. Just an outstanding job. So thank you for that. I would like to, if I could, comment for a minute on your cannabis problem. Just note my strong opposition to making any change to the proposed fee schedule based on that challenge. And I get it. I think those of us in agriculture appreciate it at two different levels, one being a regulated community and you know, two, also not wanting to make sure that we don't bear an unnecessary portion of that burden. I think I came here today with the last words that staff said in my ear when we asked them at the last meeting. Are you going to put this cannabis program back on us? And the answer was no. At the time, they didn't have that intent to do that. And I think staff rightly acknowledged the fact that this is really the first time that that's been proposed. I would expect that had that proposal been, you know, before us and had been discussed, been able to look at it, there would be a significant number of my ag colleagues that have, you know, written a letter, be here today to oppose. I know some of us will certainly make some comments after my card. So I do think that it's important, right, that ag community and other fee payers, right, have an opportunity to provide some input on that. Just note, and I won't get all Charlie Hoppin farmer on you here, Tam, that's for you. And just say that, you know, 20 staff, and I get it, we all think our folks do good jobs, and they certainly do. But that's a 1% change in your total staff allocation. And, you know, I think from an agricultural perspective, you know, let's work on that. Let's see how you can do that 1%. You know, 20 people seems like a lot, 1% maybe puts it in a little better context. So with that, I would just respectfully ask that we make no changes relative to the cannabis program. I expect you'll still see some leveling out of what is cannabis in California for this next year, as well as more years to come. So with that, I just, again, appreciate the opportunity to address you today.
Really appreciate it, Mr. Johnson, and the praise of staff as well. I know that when you first proposed, maybe there'd be a space for discussion amongst the ag groups around this. I know it took 2 years, so it was not without a tremendous amount of work, though, from staff and from the community as well. And so just appreciate that work and the support. So thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next up, I'd like to call up Mr. Bob Gore from the Gualco Group, representing the cities of...
I'll still stipulate to the ones listed on the card. There are several cities, irrigation districts, and agricultural interests
Good to see you today, Mr.
in
Gore.
our clientele. Couple things independently and overarching. In 2008, when I was in the Schwarzenegger's governor's office, there was a program presented called FizCal. And I can independently verify it does have some issues that linger on today that are causing serious problems across all 155 agencies, boards, commissions, and whatnot. I would like to thank Board Member Dodak for raising cost of compliance issues in 2012. And our work continues there. We've met with you, staff, and we look forward in the fall to implementing some rigorous discussions of cost of compliance control. A couple of quick examples to give you some ideas: test type and frequency, also multi-use data. God forbid, even interagency use, perhaps of data supplied for Sigma, being able to reposition it as certified for various WDR permits. Also, we'll be obtaining massive amounts of data from CV salts, which I think would immediately apply to both endeavors. As far as the matter at hand, water quality fees, the WDR 15% increase rounding upwards is a heavy lift, but understandable, and we hope to address it on a continuing basis. The Ag Lands tiers are acceptable. We endorse the carve out for rice. They've done their homework. The $1.08, it's up 3 cents. Seems de minimis. Well, for Kings River Conservation District, one of the largest fee payers and irrigation districts in the state, that's $20,000. That's a significant impact, those 3 pennies, just so you're aware of the consequences of 11th hour adjustments. We hope to continue to mitigate this. And be aware for Ag Lands, the impact of Sigma, as we all know, is going to result in what Karen Ross says is 25 to 40% fallowing. This directly impacts the revenue available. This may make cannabis seem de minimis. So we all need to be aware of a reality that's going to be imposed on us within 6 months. We hope to help with the resolution next fiscal year. And finally, as far as cannabis goes, September surprises aren't good for stakeholders. They're very negative. To be honest, it's a breach of trust. This impact is unknown, undiscussed, and completely unacceptable. Over the past 3 years, I personally have repeatedly emphasized that cannabis is firewalled, and I have been repeatedly promised by staff in our stakeholder and BCP hearings that this would be the case. There would be no co-mingling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. When you first mentioned that you were in the Schwarzenegger administration, and given the context of the fee discussion, I thought you were going to say you were there when we get off the general fund and became a completely fee-supported organization. And maybe we should think about going back to a more balanced way, so you all fee payers don't have to bear the brunt of everything.
When the recession hit, as Chief Deputy Cabinet Secretary, it was my responsibility, and I did sign off, as you recall, on the transition from general fund to fees, and it's one reason why, personally, I regard this as a mission to make it work.
I appreciate that, and we do, apologize about the circumstances on the discussion of the cannabis program that we would have had there were delayed discussions. That's all, and so we apologize on that. Next, I'd like to call up Paul Kelly from CalDSAL, who will be followed by Tim Tutt from Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and it's nice to see all of you again today. And Mr. Chairman, nice to speak to you. I will just, before I get into my comments, say that I'm happy to see the Russian River Watershed Association here, as one wearing one of my previous hats helped create that organization, as well as chaired it at one time, probably 15 years ago. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the California Desalination Association and our membership. I want to also just mention that from our perspective, the target of getting cost recovery within the desalination section of the department is a very reasonable goal. And just remind you that this is a new fee and that there hadn't been a fee previously for the determination letter. And so I think there were some opportunities to actually institute this in a way that makes sure that all get handled. Also want to continue with the theme of thanking staff and Glen in particular for reaching out and engaging multiple times with us and taking very seriously our input. And so we really want to appreciate that, both from the finance side, the fee creation side, but also always including the program staff that we're actually having to implement it and do the work. So a couple of things that I would mention, and I could do this in like 10 seconds and say, yeah, we're for option 2. But I would also mention that it's our feeling that at minimum that the fee should be coincide with the interagency MOU that was directed by this board in 2015 to occur when the Ocean Plan Amendment was adopted to help facilitate the putting together these permits. That the fee and the application should comply with the Permit Streamlining Act, and that also there should be basically a lifetime cap on the annual application fee to provide an incentive to actually get the fee completed and before its boards to be approved, very similar to some of the others since this transitions into an NPDES fee. So it's not like the applicant isn't going to pay something down the road. It's really our assertion that basing a fee on intake type is bad policy. All other fees, including the ongoing fee after the project is completed, pays a flow or size fee on an NPDES purposes. It actually does mix some of the policy and fee by predetermining a particular policy preference. And it's our opinion that the Ocean Plan does not say that there's basically a policy of doing subsurface, that it's actually surface has to provide some feasibility elements as it relates to that. And it's already more expensive. It's also the fact that is that the larger projects are going to most likely be surface versus subsurface. Therefore, they would pay a larger fee anyway. What we've proposed and what is shown in your option 2, which is a base fee plus a MGD multiplier, actually reaches your cost recovery needs. It's easier to flow that into your NPDES permit fees into the future if projects get approved. And also, it gives an opportunity, since it is a new fee, for staff to track their time, to figure out actually what are some of the costs related to the different types of applications, and you can come back with your future fee hearings to make adjustments to that. Since one of the things we suggested was another option would be a base fee with a cost recovery agreement with your applicants, which some agencies do, and that was not available to staff because they didn't track their time that way. So that made it difficult. This adopting a fee under option 2 would actually allow you to accomplish that. And again, the industry really feels that that's the best way to implement the fee, and particularly since it's a small universe that's paying the fee, we recognize the challenge of combining that into your cost recovery goals. Appreciate your consideration of our concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your
I'm
comments.
sorry, could you help me understand how, at least what I seem to gather from your comment is you don't think under option 1, staff would be able to track their time? How is that?
No.
Did I misunderstand?
Yeah. So, yes, under option 1, it's a straight fee based on intake type.
Correct.
And the tripling of the base fee for surface type is the assertion by staff to Glen and others that are putting together the fee that those types of projects take 3 times their time. That's in our opinion, that is both anecdotal and particular to one particular project that's been in the process. Might as well say it, Huntington Beach. So we think that having it based on option 2, which is the size, number 1, you're going to get very similar fee amount for the department for either one of those projects. 2, you can actually eventually figure out whether or not your time over the subsequent year or 2 tracking it actually is more or less based on your intake type, and you can make adjustments easier down the road. Like, if we do option 2, you could come up and say, well, it appears that the per MGD amount should be 2,200 instead of 2,000 that's in the current list, versus having to come back and say, well, we've got a subsurface or a surface intake application that we didn't anticipate, and we need to somehow modify that fee without really any basis for it. I hope that makes some sense. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Bishop, do you have any comments?
I would have to disagree that the ocean plan doesn't have a preference for surface or subsurface. It has a direct preference for subsurface. It does allow for surface intakes as long as they show that they have the equivalent impact associated. And I would,
That demonstration that involves staff time.
that's correct. I would also mention that all of the options will recover the costs that we need. That's why there are options up there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, I'd like to call up Tim Tutt from Sacramento Municipal Utilities District.
Good morning, Chair, board members, staff. Tim Tutt from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm here to respectfully request that you delay the adoption of the water quality certification fees related to wildfire and certification plans and wildfire activities. We're not necessarily opposed to those fees or the fee structure. We just haven't had enough time to understand the impacts to SMUD and other utilities in the state, because we just found out about this yesterday. I apologize about missing any outreach activities that may have happened. I'm not the wildfire person at SMUD, but I understand that nobody from SMUD participated in the August 9th and August 16th calls on this issue. So we're just respectfully asking that you delay so that we have some opportunity to understand the impact and understand the, how moving to, sort of a fee structure that's constant and based on miles of transmission line as opposed to any kind of project activity we might actually do impacts SMUD. So appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Danny Merkley from the California Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Chair, members. I would like to align myself with Mr. Gore's comments with regard to the cannabis fee. This is a complete surprise. It is very contrary to everything that we've heard, we've discussed, and it's very unacceptable. Along those lines, I'm surprised that anybody is surprised at how that cannabis program has evolved. Everybody involved, except maybe those that were sampling some of their own product, knew the program was not going to amount to what some were saying it would amount to. So I don't get it. I don't understand where people are getting their information. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I think those program assumptions were developed with the Department of Finance and all of our sister agencies when it came to what the expected enrollment in the numbers were. Yeah. But
so
thank you, Mr. Merkley.
I
And
do want
Mr.
to
Bishop.
make it clear that the increase that they're talking about is for the foundational programs. It's not a transfer of other fees to cover the staff, but it is related to cannabis, and it's related to their lack of ability to cover the foundational fees. So.
Just like to call up next Don Kopke from the California Council of Environmental and Economic Balance, CEEB.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Dawn Kepke on behalf of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some brief comments relative to the water quality certification program, including the proposed annual fee on electric service providers driven by the 901 requirements. I just would note that although I have not been specifically directly involved with staff on this issue, a number of our CEEB utility members have, and so I offer these comments based on kind of work that they have been working with the department on, or excuse me, the board on and staff. With regard to the proposed 19% increase for standard 401 certification discharge fees, SEEB is okay and amenable to that. However, we do have some members who do have concerns with the annual fee on electric service providers being proposed. More specifically, with regard to the annual fee calculated at a rate of $43 per high fire threat transmission line miles that we understand is intended to support 9 PYs dedicated to streamlining permitting, oversight of projects associated with electric utilities wildfire mitigation plans, and the development of a general permit for dredge and fill activities conducted in accordance with those plans. While SEEB utility members are in favor of the state board developing a new general permit for wildfire risk mitigation and the prevention work associated with that, SEEB and its members do have concerns with the proposed staffing increase for the projected workload, the scope, as well as overall complexity of the SB 901 driven work anticipated. A few points along those lines. Our members have indicated that they understand the state board's assumed workload to be an increase of 300% that they indicate is significantly higher than the utility's own projected 80% increase from the 2018 baseline. Additionally, the costs derived from the proposed annual fee will translate to a per project fee that is often substantially greater than the total cost of the actual project. These costs will ultimately be a financial burden on ratepayers and the public, which is of concern. And other similar projects not related to wildfire risk mitigation could still be subject to a standard project-based filing fee. SEEB utility members have proposed a couple of alternatives. One would be a moderate increase in staff by 2 or 3 PYs and an opportunity to reevaluate in next budget year 2021. That would still allow general permit development, provide for an increase of oversight and inspections, provide for an opportunity to increase staff over time as workload requires, and yet mitigate any risk of overstaffing. Additionally, proposed to potentially increase the standard water quality certification filing fee greater than the proposed 19% to accommodate the increased PYs. This would provide for additional staff to develop a general permit, add staff able to work on other projects besides wildfire mitigation activities, and also avoids the risk of overstaffing. With regard to the change sheet that was released last evening, we were also hoping just to obtain a bit of clarification along the changes made in this area. And while we understand that some of the language changes seem to be providing the references specifically for the requirements associated with the wildfire mitigation plans, we do request some clarification just on the change relative to the language that omits transmission and replaces that with overhead electrical lines, and just want to kind of better understand the intent around that change so we can better understand the effect that that might have. Thank you.
Do we want to respond?
Does staff want to go ahead and respond to the question?
Yeah, so Phil is consulting with program on that, but my understanding on the change sheet is the changes were made to make the fee regulations more consistent with the actual SB 901 language.
Yeah, that's correct. So the main change is changing from the wildfire mitigation plans that are approved to just those that are prepared. It's a different process for the utilities that are regulated by CPUC. They have to submit their plans to CPUC for approval, whereas entities like SMUD, they don't have to submit them to CPUC for approval. So we just use the term prepared in accordance with the law. And I was actually just getting some numbers for what we're projecting SMUD's fee would be under that approach. I can talk about it now or later. It's your choice.
I believe the gentleman, Mr. Tutt from SMUD, is still with us. So, but if you want to give us an idea, it might be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, so just, so staff did do their best to reach out to the utilities that were affected. They focused primarily on the utilities that have the most land and overhead lines within the high fire threat districts that are designated. And so those do not include SMUD. I just looked up SMUD's their draft wildfire mitigation plan, and they identify approximately 130 or 140 miles of overhead transmission lines. So their fee would work out to, on an annual basis, about 1/4% of the total fee that would be allocated among all the utility companies. And I was in the middle of doing that math to come up with the exact amount. I think it's in the neighborhood of about $6,000 per year would cover all of their dredge and fill activities within the high fire threat areas. And here's the number. So just under $6,000 is what we're projecting would be their annual cost. And again, that would cover all of their dredge or fill projects within the high fire threat areas to mitigate the risk of fire from their overhead lines.
Thank you, Mr. Wiles. Great math work.
And not to push back too heavily, but just to remind everybody, there's a whole budgetary process that goes on before this. We are very clear when we go to the legislature for any of these budget change proposals, we need X number of staff. Here's what these staff are going to be doing. This is what they're going to be working on. And there are a number of hearings that we go through, and those are all approved. And it really is at that point that it may be more beneficial for some of the stakeholders to engage. So we go into the budget process saying we have a mandate, or in this case it was the fire response last year, or the year before it was our ag lands. It's a recurring thing that we go in with the intention and the expectation from the administration and the legislature that we will fund these positions to do what they told us we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Last up, I'd like to call JP Cataviella from Dairy Cares Coalition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. Thank you, board members, for hearing me. I am JP Cataviella with the Dairy Cares Coalition. I just want to start by saying that I've now in this job close to 18 years, and I've spent a lot of the last few years really building relationship with the state water board staff and our regional board staff to work on dairy-related environmental issues. Do appreciate and value that relationship, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. I also do, as inspired by Tim Johnson, I want to call out Glen as well, just because whenever I've had a question, he's been able to answer it for me, and he doesn't put me through a lot of rigmarole. He often will get back the same day. I really do appreciate that. Helps us understand what's going on. I do want to thank Glen for presenting our concerns as outlined in our letter. I do need to clarify a couple points. He related that our position is that we should not get a fee increase, and it should be passed on to others in the confined animal facility program. That is not our position. Our position is that before across the board increases on confined animal facilities are implemented, there should be a better accounting of time that the staff have spent on the various programs. We've noticed in dairy that a lot of the staff that used to completely be dedicated to dairy are now working in other programs. They're working on bovine, they're working on poultry, and we've asked that that some accounting be done before that is done to see if it is in fact fair to do that. The other is, the point was made by staff, and I agree with this, that cost increases are to be expected. So if we're just saying, oh well, we don't want cost increases because we can't pass them on, then we're in a very large group of folks that. What we're concerned about, I'd like to add this nuance that we're concerned that the overall program costs continue to go up while the size of the regulated community goes down. We have 30% fewer dairies than we did when I started working in this area, and we're not seeing the overall cost of regulating those fewer dairies be adjusted accordingly. And this is not a new issue. It may be new for some of you, but this is something we've brought before the board in the past. And I think the staff and the board members in the past have been sympathetic to that issue and have tried to come up with ways to do it. We just haven't gotten that job done yet, and we haven't figured out a way, because eventually if we pass on the cost of regulating the entire industry to an ever smaller group, the costs on those remaining folks go up much more than the rate of the cost that you're experiencing, because they're not only getting the cost increase, but they're getting the extra cost related to their neighbor going out of business. So we hope that we can deal with that. I appreciate that 9.5% is one of the smaller cost increases this year, but that is still a significant lift for our dairies in this economy. And it is also follows another cost increase just last year. So, you know, it isn't something that we can just absorb easily. So I don't expect this issue to get solved today. It hasn't been solved in the last few years. And I do hope, you know, maybe in the spirit of a new administration, that maybe we can restart discussions about how we can deal with this type of a situation and come up with a way that feels and seems fair both to the stakeholders all around, you know, in this process. We understand costs go up. We get that, but we feel like the way they're going up is counterintuitive. We have far fewer dairies. We see the staff that used to work on us going to other programs, and we're not seeing an adjustment that seems to bring that into effect. So we look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
A question just for staff related to this. I know, actually, with probably almost all the commenters, there's been significant changes in recent years or this year in terms of the regulatory programs, and that was, I think, Mr. Russell, your point, and somewhat in terms of the budget process being different from this. But we also have new regulatory programs that are being developed for non-dairy CAFOs. I know, like, the Region 5 has been now developing other programs. I'm just wondering if that trend of regions starting to develop regulatory programs for non-dairy CAFOs is resulting in more fee payers paying in, or is that increasing costs as well? Can you just give me a sense of what the impacts?
Yes, I'll answer the last part first. It's not increasing the cost because we're not adding in any PYs unless we get a BCP to do that. The two primary ones in the Central Valley were the poultry and the bovine, so we are starting to see that additional revenue. Unfortunately, most of the new regulatory requirements are for a limited number of facilities that pale in comparison to the number of dairies and the size of the dairy. So they may come in and maybe offset, I'm just top of my head here, 1 or 2% of an adjustment, but it's not going to be a huge difference. And I do want to clarify Mr. Cataviela's clarification of my statement is valid. I tried to summarize a 2-page document in a 2-sentence and didn't capture it correctly.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts from fellow board members? Or, you know, for me, obviously there's the issue that we need to decide on when it comes to cannabis. I think everything else, I've heard general support, and I think maybe there's a discussion we can have around how we treat the desal option. But kind of open to how you guys want to discuss or proceed.
Yeah, so also just reiterate, I so appreciate the time that staff has put into developing the stakeholder process. I think that it makes a better outcome, and I really appreciate the stakeholders working with staff over so many, amongst themselves and with staff over many months, trying to help us get this, continue to improve this program. We're always trying to balance equity and efficiency and stability in terms of fiscal responsibility. I think you know, my feeling from staff is that they really value the trust that they've built with stakeholders, and you know, also agree this is not the position that they would like to be in with stakeholders after, you know, spending so much time working through each of these areas. So I feel like I would support I I feel like for everything other than cannabis, I would support staff recommendations. And since there isn't a recommendation from staff on cannabis, I think we should not pass those foundational costs this year on to stakeholders. I think in the interest of valuing that trust, I think that is not appropriate this year. I think given that this was somewhat of a surprise to us, so it was not the intent to withhold this information from stakeholders, certainly. I do think this will have really real impacts for staff and for those trying to manage how we manage vacancies and accomplish our programs. And I know it puts us in a challenging position fiscally. I would want to make sure that this is corrected next year. And, I would want to see increases in the fee for cannabis, to address this challenge in future years. I don't think it's equitable to be this year spreading that to other stakeholders. I also just want to reiterate, my understanding is, again, none of the costs that is being discussed here are actual cannabis program-specific costs. They're foundational costs that need to be shared across all programs, but it's a percentage of that, and I think that results in real changes for fee payers, and so would recommend going with, I think it's the first option of not increasing it. I do want to make sure that we are monitoring closely and trying to manage to reduce impacts on staff, obviously, and also make sure that we're correcting this next year. I also just, on another note, I'm really intrigued by the idea of how to encourage regional collaborations, like was talked about with Russian River. I'm not as familiar with that program, but I think the idea and concept as it was described of trying to provide more regional support for compliance and efficiencies is important, not just for stormwater, but really across our programs. I'm most familiar with drinking water, and I think trying to encourage regional collaborations for drinking water is also a goal. So I think it's challenging to figure out how to fit that into future fee structures, but I appreciate staff really helping to dig into that for future and figuring out how we can continue to foster that. Thanks.
Thank you, board member.
Okay, I would agree with most of the comments that were shared by Board Member Firestone there, and again, also appreciate the complexity and the challenges that we have in balancing, the costs of the programs with the desire, of course, to keep fees as low as possible and increases from year to year. With regard to cannabis, I agree that I don't think we should pass any of those additional foundational costs in the form of fees on to other programs this year, although I would also agree that looking at the cannabis program fees this coming year, in light of the fact that this year there just wasn't time to go through that process, that looking at it for next year is something that would be in order. The comments about dairies and even about Sigma and the impacts that declining enrollments, declining participation, and reduced number of dairies, ostensibly, over time, Sigma is going to result in reduced acres of irrigated agriculture, and actually even in the cannabis program, it's unknown actually how that program is going to evolve over time and how we're going to see even the enrollments that we have today, even the 5,000, whether they're going to continue to be stable participants, as we all know that that's a very dynamic industry right now and changing before our eyes. And so I would be interested in hearing more down the road about how we can better anticipate, and just in terms of long-term projections, how changes in enrollments and participations in our various regulatory programs will in turn impact fees and even staffing needs in those programs, and how we can adapt to those changing times. So the stormwater very much appreciate the comments and agree again about the opportunities for regional collaboration, I think abound in stormwater, and I applaud the Russian River initiative that's been taken there. I think there's a number of other, other regions that going forward will be able to look at similar types of opportunities to collaborate with schools, with industrial dischargers and the like, in finding ways to merge their common interests in protecting watersheds and meeting the regulatory objectives. So I certainly encourage and would hope to see that there's some conversations that happen there with regard to stormwater fees and ways to incentivize that program going forward. On desalination, I appreciate Mr. Kelly's comments. And actually, in this case, while I can see the merits of either of the fee proposals, I do actually think I would not be opposed to the option 2, which is looking at a fee based on capacity. I think Mr. Kelly made some good comments about the straightforward nature of looking at the establishment of fees. So going into the future, as you're looking at fee adjustments, it'll be a much more transparent and consistent process. Again, when they're transitioning to the NPDES permits, which is ultimately where this is going to go, that it would be kind of a seamless way to do that. So I think setting it up in terms of the surface or subsurface intakes, which I understand, that the surface intakes are certainly much more complex problem to tackle, much more staff intensive. Again, going back to the notion that we are not a fee-for-service agency, that was shared earlier. And so that I feel that going and breaking it down in terms of project type is leaning more towards that fee-for-service type of approach. And so in this case, I think option 2 would be more appropriate. And those are my comments for now.
Well, I think I agree on everything except that last part. And that is basically a policy call, I would agree. Well, I also appreciate Mr. Kelly's comment. I was here for the adoption of the Basin Plan Amendment, the Ocean Plan, and there was a distinct preference the board then, which of course is now different, had for subsurface only. And so my preference for option 1 is based on that preference. We wanted to encourage people to pursue subsurface intakes, and there was a great deal of there was a lot of requests made by some of the utilities for an option for them to demonstrate that surface and combined surface subsurface might be feasible. So while part of it is an issue based on resources, it was also the board's then preference for subsurface as I forget the terminology, Jonathan, was it best available or whatever the correct terminology was at that time, that led to the adoption action that we took, which then led to, I think, the development of option 1.
I don't remember the exact terms. It's it comes out of the.
Okay, the lawyer will know. Mr. Laufer?
It's the best available design site facility, 13142.5 factors. I threw it all in, but yes, the board made its policy preference at the time it adopted the Ocean Plan amendments.
And unless that option or that preference by the board has changed, which I don't think it has, but of course we have not had a discussion about that, my preference would still be option 1 based on that preference that the board had in adoption the Ocean Plan amendment.
If I can, just to clarify a little bit about the fee for service comment, we do as an agency try to set the fees based in large part on the type of or the amount of staff oversight that is required to oversee those permitted facilities. John's point was that it's not on an hour-by-hour basis, so we're not trying to account for each hour that we spend on each facility. But you are right, Chair Member Dodek, this is really a policy call. We have, in the past, for a lot of the discharges, we've used volume of discharge as a surrogate, assuming that the higher the volume, the more staff resources are needed to regulate that particular facility.
Also, the higher the volume, higher potentially the impact.
Which also is a surrogate for staff time. The higher the impact, the more time we should be spending focused on that discharge. In this case, I do agree, though, that it is policy. It's a discretionary call here because either surrogate could work for desalination facilities. Staff was proposing surface versus subsurface as sort of the most significant break in terms of staff resources. There are, I think everybody agrees, a lot more resources that go into evaluating a proposal for a surface intake than for a subsurface intake. But flow would be another acceptable surrogate. So whatever the board's pleasure is, either one will work.
Well, alternatively, I will propose the very reasonable option 3, which staff noted was a hybrid approach, which kind of included both concepts of having a reduced fee for subsurface intakes while also including the volumetric charge.
It does sound reasonable. I think I'd be in support of option 3, and then ultimately am also with my colleagues on not raising fees when it comes to the base fee on the foundational programs from cannabis, and we're going to eat that one, I think. Well,
Actually, before we move onward, let me ask staff for, I don't know if we discussed this extensively when you brought up slide 11 to discuss the 3 options, but what is the ramification of the annual maximum of 200,000?
I apologize. We were just discussing the need to actually mock up the language for option 3. So we'll need a couple of minutes for that.
Yes. So I'm looking at the slide number 11 with the 3 options, and options 2 and option 3, which we now seem to be focused on, has an annual maximum of 200,000. And my question is, what is the ramification of that?
So I'll jump in here, although I had to step away for a second. So that 200,000 was to recognize that there's some upper limit that the
Exactly.
large facilities would have to pay. In all of these options, we didn't give you all the details, but they do all, for the subset of facilities that we currently have to do our analysis, they all pay very comparable on each of the 3 options. So that 200,000 just says there's a certain maximum.
I understand what it means, but I'm asking, would imposing a $200,000 maximum change the, yes, I mean, does it make the program whole? Potentially, could that create a problem in making the program whole if there is a cap?
No, as far as the identified facilities. My only concern is, I think Mr. Kelly stated that for the most part, the larger facilities are going to be surface intakes, which would pay the higher fee. I've been told that there is a possibility that a very small surface could come in and they would pay a lower fee. We wouldn't generate the targeted revenue. But of the identified current facilities, it doesn't have any impact. That's why we set the cap, because we'll still generate the same revenue.
So can I ask a question in a slightly different way? The largest facility is 50 million gallons per day. They would pay 200,000. If it was just by gallons, how much would they pay?
Are we looking option 2 or 3?
3.
Okay. And you're talking surface?
Yeah.
So it's 120,000, and if they're 1 MGD, you're talking $121,000.
So they would be under the cap.
Yeah, it'd be under the cap.
So it's not going to have a
So it's not gonna
general
have a
impact. I think that's what you were asking.
That's what, thank you.
Oh,
Jonathan
okay.
is always the board member whisperer. He can translate our thoughts so well. Thank you.
I'm so focused on the NADA, I get focused on it, so.
Sorry, I have one other just clarification. So are these options just for after they've gone through the application and they've been permitted, the ongoing NPDES?
No, this is the cost for that permitting process.
Okay.
There hasn't been a cost associated with that in the past, and what we found is that to actually permit these and go through this process is a multi-year process.
Yeah. So, and then is there a different charge after it's been permitted than what we're discussing now?
Yes,
Okay.
and that would be based on the MPDS, and it's pretty much totally flow rated with a cap. And I don't remember what the cap is off the top of my head.
I don't have it in front of me, but it's roughly $500,000 is the cap for the flow-based, active facilities.
Yeah. So I guess it seems pretty clear to me, based on just the few months that I've been part of the board and, seeing the regional boards work on desal, that surface water intakes are a significant increased cost for regional boards to go through that process. And I think, as we've discussed, there's both a policy preference and a cost involved in providing that flexibility. So my understanding is option 3 still takes that into account, but not as much, because it also takes into account the fact, the difference in volume that's being applied for. So that is, I guess, help me understand how that might change the burdens.
Okay, so I'll try to simplify this in a different viewpoint. Option 1, I call it a 1-to-3 relationship. So if you're surface, you're paying 1/3 of or so if you're subsurface, you're 1/3 of surface. Option 2 is a 1-to-1. It doesn't matter what the intake type is. Option 3 is a 1-to-2, so it's a halfway. So if you're subsurface, you're going to pay about half of what a surface would pay, with the flow metric thrown in there as well. So it's a 1-to-3 for option 1, a 1-to-1 relationship, and then a 1-to-2 relationship. I don't know if that helps or not.
So there's a slightly different way of looking at it, and so I'll throw that out there, is that your base price for subsurface is half in option 3, and then your size makes up the difference. So a small subsurface is going to pay a lot less than a small surface. You can see that that at a small 1 million gallon per day subsurface would pay approximately 61,000, if I'm doing the math right off the top of my head, as opposed to 62,000 in option 1. Anything that's over 2 million gallons a day for subsurface is going to pay more under option 3, because there's a reduction in the surface intake one. So that's the break point. Really small are going to pay less under option 3, but anything that's over a couple million gallons per day is going to, under subsurface, is going to pay more, because the surface is going to pay less.
And maybe, Board Member McGuire, is there help me understand the benefit of doing that as opposed to just the surface intake?
Well, I think it's also responsive to the fact that, the larger facilities are indeed more complex and have greater impacts. So, I mean, in my mind, even when you're looking at just open surface, intakes, that some of the smaller facilities, which I think there is potentially one proposed, wouldn't have to pay the same fee as a much larger facility, in that same situation. So I think it addresses both those concerns about both the size and type of intake. So I think it's a fair middle ground in this case.
Further discussion or debate amongst the board, or is someone prepared with a motion?
Chair Esquivel,
yes.
While you're continuing to ponder, just want to point out we do have 2 change sheets. So if you could, whoever makes the motion could include that. And then unfortunately, I'm afraid that there's one edit to the change sheet for the agenda item. The change sheet for the fee schedule is accurate as we drafted it, but with the agenda item, we did not make one of the changes that we intended to. So there's one paragraph that has a bullet associated with it, and on the fourth line, it says, a wildfire mitigation plan developed and approved in accordance with, and that should actually be prepared in accordance with those the sections that follow. So just the agenda item, but just to make sure that it's consistent with what the board's actually adopting.
Just a couple of questions as I'm thinking about trying to process more between option 3 and option 1. So do we have a sense of how many small desal plants have applications in where they would be impacted differently? Sorry, you don't have to know the exact number, but are there many?
So our program staff just walked in the room.
So while they're coming up with real answers, I'll just talk exponentially off the top of my head.
Well, and as you're talking, I also my question for you too is there a reason that that staff proposed option 1 rather than option 3 that hasn't been highlighted yet?
So let's be clear, there are two different things going on. Option 1 was really based on the idea that it's much more difficult to permit and do the determination for a surface intake, and that's what that reflects. Options 2 and 3 reflect that larger volumes have a bigger impact on the environment. That's a different consideration, but they're both valid considerations. Mm-hmm. And so they really look at two different things, and they're not directly comparable in terms of how, you're either looking at volume as an impact, which we have done many times in MPDS. That's the way we did it. And then we put a cap on it because at a certain level it becomes monstrous, and we didn't want to do that in MPDS. But the option that staff proposed was really based on this much more difficult workload. We do have a few existing small desal facilities. I don't know if we have any proposed ones coming up. And so, do you know, Claire?
Hi, Claire Wagoner with the Division of Water Quality. So, yeah, we have had some applications even for pilot facilities. So the Ocean Plan doesn't really carve out even for a pilot facility whether you have to go through different analyses. So even if it's a small, we had one proposal for Camp Pendleton that was on the order of hundreds of thousands of gallons. So the environmental impacts purportedly would have been low. It's similar where it would have had to go through CEQA. The site analysis would have been the same. So in some regards, you would think that the environmental impacts, wouldn't be as much, but the investigation and the number of reports is still the same. So in terms of staff time, it doesn't, there's not a lot of savings there based on a volumetric approach, or, a bigger facility doesn't necessarily mean less staff work. And then the other concern is for folks like Doheny, who they're going to probably start small. They wouldn't really get that cost savings. They might grow bigger, but they're proposing subsurface intake. So in some ways, in terms of staff time, we think that one's going to be a lot easier to permit because they're proposing subsurface intake. So it reduces the number of analyses that we have to look at. And, things like mitigation are significantly reduced to potentially eliminated. So, when you look at the number of analyses that we have to do, big or small, it really comes down to whether they're doing subsurface or surface water intakes. And I should add, it could also be if they're proposing alternative technologies. So.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. So I feel comfortable doing option 3 and would support that.
So let me actually offer something else. No, I mean, option 3, yes, but option 3 with a caveat, option 3 with a direction to staff. I mean, obviously, you are making your best estimate as to what you think will be needed. And one of the things that I think, you started the discussion earlier is the idea of better understanding our efforts and our efficiencies on all activities, not just this particular one, but on really everything we do. And so, while going with option 3 is an elegant compromise at this point, I would like to better understand as we proceed, whether it's next year or the year after or whenever, as more of these projects come in, a better understanding of the resources needed for whether it's a combined subsurface or an alternative intake, just a better understanding and better tracking of the resources that we need. And so, yes, go with option 3, but we always have the option of revisiting in the future should our understanding based on real experience shows us that there's a better way to approach this.
So I would interpret that to mean that you would like us, as we're evaluating for next year or the year after, have a comparison to the staff workload associated with subsurface versus surface intakes, essentially tracking
Or
our time.
alternative technologies.
Alternative technologies, yes. And I would also suggest that might be fruitful in our evaluation of, we are proposing for you to consider in a couple of months, updates to our triennial review for the ocean plan. One of the items is revisiting this desal policy. And so we will try and get some estimates for the past and keep track as we go forward in the future.
I think it's only fair, since Mr. Gore is still here, he'll know that my challenge to the regulated community in the cost of compliance effort is, you keep telling me it costs a lot, show me that it costs a lot. So the challenge back to staff is, you keep telling me it's resource incentive, show me where the resource intensity is.
I would also like to add that coming up with the fee for all the 3 options was very difficult because the community was so small. Anyone that does numbers, the smaller you have, the more likely you are to be wrong. So if we had thousands of facilities, we'll get close. But when we have 8 or 9, projecting that over years, we have to review it next year anyways.
Yeah. Well, this ties into the water resiliency portfolio discussion. Certainly, desal will continue to have a place in California's future. We continue to discuss, on the policy level and otherwise, how we do that. And this is a good step insofar as bringing them in-house, insofar as being able to be part of our program. Hopefully, who knows, and at some point, maybe it's not 9 facilities, but it is additional ones that are ecologically friendly and creating water resilient communities for us. But anyway.
So, Mr. Lawford, does staff have language or something?
Yes, I believe Ms. Townsend has language reflecting option 3 that will pull up on the screen momentarily. Now, not all the staff have seen this yet either, so we may have some additional changes on the fly. And so what you see in the highlighted text are the changes that are proposed to convert the original staff proposal into option 3.
Yeah, that's great. That's what we came up with also independently, except after the 1,007, I think we should make that a $sign and multiplied by MGD for million gallons per day, or just per MGD. MGD, million gallons per day. And if you wouldn't mind putting a $sign in front of the 1,007. And this is how regulations get written. Thanks, Janine.
All right. If there's no more discussion, I will move for adoption of this item with the change sheets and this particular change that we see on screen.
And the one edit to the change sheet, if you don't mind.
And the one edit, yes.
Do you have to mention the option we decided on when it comes to the cannabis program?
Oh, yes, thank you.
I check with the staff, but I don't think you do because it's not included in any of the fees.
Anyway, yeah.
Perfect. Even greater.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries, and we've adopted our drinking water quality fees. I will give us a 15-minute bio break. We can come back at 11:30 here, and we will move on then to item number 12, which is our drinking water fee. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I said 11:30. It's 11:35. I was caught up on a call. But now we're prepared to move to our drinking water item. And Mr. Russell or whoever would like to lead us. Thank you.
Hello. David again will be giving the majority of the presentation today, and with us is Kim Niemeyer, our attorney. I don't have really any introductory remarks other than to say my fiscal comments at the beginning of the water quality fee pertain to these fees as well.
Good morning, Board Chair, fellow board members. David Shakir here again. I'm with Kim Niemeyer from the Office of the Chief Counsel. I'm here to present item number 12, the drinking water fees. Before you today for your consideration is a resolution adopting emergency regulations revising the drinking water fee schedules. Stakeholder outreach, again, is similar to the drinking water and our water rights fee schedules. We had 3 stakeholder meetings with each iteration of the governor's budget. And, you know, part of these stakeholder meetings, again, we talk about our cost drivers. Part of the cost drivers, of course, as I mentioned, you know, is our normal employee compensation. But what's driving the cost here in the drinking water program, where there were 3 approved budget change proposals in the governor's budget, which are listed there, one for drinking water system sanitary surveys, increased drinking water laboratory surveys, and there were also 2 positions. This was a May revise that came in for annual county primacy delegation revocation workload. And basically kind of the net effect was it was about 1.9 million. And what I mean by that is that there was also, again, earlier, there was a space optimization that had an impact to this program. So the net increase to the program was $1.9 million. So, and before I kind of get into just looking at the fund condition, I just want to kind of give our recommendation right now. Staff is recommending a 10% fee increase across all water system types to generate the revenue to cover our program cost. I just, again, wanted to highlight that fees have not been adjusted in the drinking water program since 16-17. The program came over from the public health, and we did a year of basically a fee structure that was based on fee for service. That was their schedule over at public health, and then we went ahead and based our fee structure based on the number of service connections. So I kind of want to just point out I won't call this a fund because the term in the Department of Finance is actually an account. So it's the Safe Drinking Water account. As you can see in fiscal year 18-19, we had a kind of a significant reserve of about 16.5%. One thing I will highlight here, though, is that we also had a structural deficit with our revenue compared to our expenditures of about 1.7 million. However, again, because of the reserve last year, I did not take any proposals to the board, and these were discussions that I had with the stakeholders. One of the things I always was pointing out to the stakeholders is that one of my concerns is that structural deficit, and I don't want that to get too far out of line because of the fact that there's always going to be the fee increases for our normal costs, but then there's also an adjustment just to cover that structural deficit. So moving forward in 1920, the year that we're currently in, if there were no fee increases, if you guys had decided not to adopt a fee increase, you would see that the structural deficit moves to about $3.8 million, and our fund reserve draws down to about 2.2%. So again, back to our proposal of doing a 10% fee increase across all of our fee structures in the drinking water program. What this would do is it would generate approximately about $27.4 million in revenue. It would give us an ending balance of about $3.1 million, which is a 10% reserve, something that we shoot for in most of our funds. is about a 10% reserve. But again, what you will notice, and I'll point this out, is that we still do have a structural deficit of $1.3 million. I did talk with the stakeholders during the process to bring up revenue expenditures and align them. It would be more about a 15% increase. But again, what happens is then your reserve still stays about 16%. So this is one program, and I know, John, we talk about the fiscal concerns and things like that, about knowing the numbers. Again, going into this, though, I do know that we're comfortable having the revenue. So at this point, staff is recommending a 10% increase, which again drives us to a 10% reserve, and then continue to monitor it next fiscal year, looking at to cover that structural deficit. So again, the water system types affected by this proposed 10% fee increase would be the community water systems, the non-transient, non-community water systems, the transient non-water systems, and the wholesalers. Oops. So to kind of just give some examples here, our disadvantaged communities, we have a fee structure right now where if you're paying basically $1 per service connection for the first 100 service connections. So the first example is a small water system that's in the disadvantaged communities, that's defined as disadvantaged communities. They would see an increase of $10. And as I go on, I kind of give an example of a minimal community water system. The average community water system has about 5,500 service connections. So their current fee would go up $1,200. And then I'm listing the 5 largest drinking water systems that we have. And you can see the kind of difference. It goes up between $25,000 up to the highest of $93,000. I did want to kind of point out the disadvantaged community water systems. We did receive a comment letter regarding that fee structure. The gentleman's name was Paul McDaniels. He was from the Strickland Mutual Water Company. And he did question about our discount, because there was a difference on our website regarding how we define disadvantaged community water systems in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, and then the guidance letter that's on our website for our fee discount, basically. And I will say that I appreciate him pointing it out to us, that there was a difference, and that we updated the fee guidance letter. And basically what it is that we take a 5-year average based on the median household income. So our letter that was for our fees was basically an off a year compared to what's been updated by the Drinking Water and the Division of Financial Assistance that had gone on for an extra year. So we made sure that those two match, basically. So that addressed his concern there, that now both of the amounts that are defining the median household income and getting the disadvantaged community discount match. And I ensured program staff that we would put steps in to make sure when they make their adjustment, that we'll make our adjustment on ours. Because again, right now the census for the data isn't out for the entire year for 2018. It's about a year to year and a half behind when that data comes out, and then we'll go ahead and update our information. And then his other comment was just basically, kind of what that sweet spot is of the disadvantaged communities. And, some of them, they go over a few service connections, some are, and I mean, we struggle with that. It's the same thing with the Division of Financial Assistance and what that key amount or that key number is, basically what qualifies you for being disadvantaged and what doesn't qualify you for disadvantage. I will say that our fee structures do give a significant discount for disadvantaged communities. To give you an example, a water system that has 1,000 service connections that's in a disadvantaged community would see a little over 200% discount compared to a community water system that's not in a disadvantaged community. So our structure currently does provide significant relief if you're in a disadvantaged community. But again, as the program evolves, we'll continue to monitor it. And again, the other impacts of proposed these water systems are, the other water system types are non-transient, non-community water systems. And these are systems that are not community water systems. They regularly serve at least 25 of the same persons for kind of a 6-month of the year. So kind of an example, like a prison that has its own water system. And so you would see there that, goes up, each of the categories goes up 10%. So $2 would go up to $220, and then, but not less than $456 goes up to $502. The transient non-community water systems, again, they pay an $800 flat fee. And these are basically systems that do not regularly serve at least 25 of the same people over a 6-month span. So just examples like campgrounds, hotels, they have their own water system. Again, the example there, they go up from 800 to 880. And my understanding and coming over from public health, the 800 was in place for a long period of time. We kept that flat fee. So I know that was in place even prior to the program coming over to the water board. And then the wholesalers, again, would also take part in this additional cost. And you can see there is the current fee and with the 10% increase. Next fiscal year, and I'll just kind of state this for record, we're projecting a 3 to 6% increase in fees next fiscal year to support standard increases in employee compensation. However, as we do every year, staff and I will continue to monitor the fund/account, any potential budget change proposals, and provide updates to the stakeholders during our stakeholder meeting process. So at that point, that concludes the presentation.
Great. Any questions, comments from staff? I don't think we have, board members, fellow board members, I don't think we have any comment cards.
No comments? Okay, I have questions then, or comments. So I think, this program and the fee structures, like you described, that's changed over time. I fully support doing an increase given that we have this structural deficit, and I think that makes sense for this year. And I also appreciate that there was such a major change in the fees back in, was it fiscal year 16-17, that you wanted to let that stabilize a bit and kind of not do major changes. This is really a comment for future years, so I'm comfortable with this year's and would move to approve them with these changes. But for future years, I think now that we have a funding source to support and try to accelerate solutions, and that we have this policy preference for consolidations, that we should really look at this fee structure and think about how we might build in that preference for consolidations in a way that still respects disadvantaged community ability to pay. And I appreciate that discount. But I'd like us just to look both for community water systems and for non-transient, non-community water systems in particular. I think transient is somewhat of a different animal. But I think both the community and non-transient, non-community water systems, we really want to strongly incentivize consolidations on many levels. We're going to be putting a lot of resources into facilitating that and funding that. So I wouldn't want to create a disincentive to do that, or, I'd like us to be consistent with that policy preference. That's really for future years. I feel comfortable with this and appreciate all of the staff time that has gone into this process.
So I just want to make sure that we're clear. So the thinking on that is to look at essentially raising the fees on smaller systems and lowering the fees on consolidated systems?
I think, I think that's one of the things that we should look at. I think also we should think about, are there incentives that we could provide for systems that are doing consolidations or regionalization efforts? I know that may be harder because it's less predictable, and we want stability and predictability in this process, but I think I would love staff to think creatively with Division of Drinking Water to think about what options are that could help reflect that priority. That I don't think we should be overburdening small systems that don't have ability to pay, obviously, but I think we should reflect that small systems that are not consolidating or refusing to consolidate take a lot more staff time.
Great. Thank you, board member. I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, and the drinking water fees are adopted. Thank you, staff. And we will move on to item number 13 now, our water rights fees.
While they're getting set up here, I just want to say that one of the things that we've really appreciated over the last 3 or 4 years, and it alludes to Member Firestone's earlier comment, is we've been coordinating and bringing in program a lot more to our fee stakeholder meetings and into this process. There's, and it's nothing, no slight against David and his staff. It's just that, there's a technical aspects to all of this, and even myself coming from a technical background, I don't fully understand every program that the board does. So it really helps us a lot to bring in the experts, and such as on the drinking water fees, we're obviously going to have to talk pretty closely, since there's a lot of moving parts on the safe and affordable drinking water with program and with DFA, and how all that fits together and how our fee structure fits into it.
Yeah, it's great to see and encouraging. So thank you for doing that.
So with that, we're on to the water rights fees. David will again be giving the presentation. With us at the table today is our attorney, David Rose, and then Amanda Montgomery from the Water Rights Program will be here to explain a certain portion that's fairly technical.
Good morning. So this item number 13, the water rights fee schedules. Before you today, I'll go with this again for your consideration as a resolution adopting emergency regulations revising the water rights fee schedules. Again, the item and the report discuss in detail the proposed changes to the core regulatory fees. But again, we're here to kind of discuss some of the notable changes. Again, stakeholder outreach. Same type of outreach that same dates that we did the water quality fees. And we also, with the water rights, we brought in, multiple stakeholders throughout the year, just kind of discussing the different fees, and had a couple different phone calls with different, specifically like on the FERC side, the utility companies. So just again, briefly going over the fund condition here. As you can see there that 18-19, our fund reserve is about 4.5%. Again, structural deficit of about 2.5 million. Again, if there were no increases in 19-20, what happens is that we draw the fund into a larger deficit, and our fund reserve would be about 10.2%. Kind of taking all this in mind, we looked at what it would take to balance the revenue and expenditures, and the proposed adjustments to the fees that we'll discuss here in a moment. will generate the revenue to do that, and it will also, at the same time, draw our reserve. Well, it brings our reserve up to about 5.2%, less than 1% over where it currently is. Again, we usually try to shoot for around a 10% reserve, but again, now what we'd be doing is doing adjustments just to build up our reserve. And because again, the increases that we're having to do this year, we thought that, the most equitable thing to do at this point is to set the fees on covering our costs and bringing it to a 5% reserve. So I'll get into our first program changes for our permits, license, and annual fees. I'll basically say that the bulk of the revenue for the Water Rights Fund is generated by our annual permits and licenses. So just about 80% of the revenue comes from this fee structure here. We're looking at our proposals to increase the annual fee, and this is the base fee side of things, from $225 to $300, and the per acre foot charge from 0.073 to 0.085 per each acre foot greater than 10 acre feet. And what I will say is that the bulk of the needed increase in fees this year is coming from a budget change proposal, which was from AB 747, which was the Administrative Hearing Office. And that was about $1.8 million. And staff's approach kind of all along was that we felt that all fee payers should be paying towards the cost of the Administrative Hearing Office. To kind of give an example, it was almost like looked at as like health insurance, right? Everyone pays into health insurance, and then when you need it, you're not having a large, outrageous bill come to you. So we felt like that all fee payers should be paying, towards this, and then when the time comes, they're not, having to pay some additional costs or a higher fee. And of course, the metric around that is we know that all fee payers are paying the base fee. We have over 14,000 fee payers, and of those, only 5,800 of them are paying the base fee. But to look at it in perspective of the $1.7 million, it was going to be about a $120 increase on the base fee to all fee payers. And keep in mind that for the smaller water right diverters and fee payers, we felt like that was a little on the high side. And so we did the analysis, and one of our proposals was a $75 increase. Now, what you may hear today is that last year we did a $75 increase on the base fee. The base fee went from $150 to $225, and of course, this year we're doing another $75. I just kind of wanted to distinguish that last year's base fee was to pretty much to get the program costs in line with revenue and the workload, and the fee had not been increased on the base fee since fiscal year 11-12. So it'd been 7 years. This is more or less paying the cost for the Administrative Hearing Office. We laid out multiple options to the stakeholders. Of course, we had an option where there'd be no increase to the base fee and a larger per acre foot charge, which basically meant that the larger water diverters in the state would be paying more. And then, of course, this option, which came up with the raising the base fee to $75 and having a per acre foot charge of 0.085, which is a 16% increase on the current per acre foot charge. And then, of course, we had a couple of in-between options. But the majority of the stakeholders preferred this option that we're proposing today. And then we have the pending applications annual fees, which also has the same per acre foot charge, so they would take place and also see this adjustment. We're not proposing to change the base fee, though. This base fee was increased last year from $250 to $750, and it was, we went through and monitored and evaluated staff time, and then there's more complexity on reviewing these applications over the years. So we will keep the base fee here remain the same as we adopted it last year on the increase. Oops. The second, I would say, second largest portion of our revenue comes from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, our FERC fees. This is somewhat of a kind of a tricky program. Again, these fees haven't been increased since 2011-12 fiscal year, and the structure itself was set in 2003, 2004. So it's been in place for some time. Basically, we have two sets of fees. We have a fee for projects that are undergoing the licensing process, so that pre-post license, and then we have a fee subject to the projects that have been issued a license. And historically, and again, working with staff, is that there has been more staff time involved with the projects that are undergoing a license and that whole license, getting them to the license stage. With that said, the workload is starting to shift a little bit more, like where there's more work again for the post-license projects. And so we had a discussion, and we actually originally came up with an option, and we were presenting with the stakeholders where we just have one fee, where we have one current base fee, and I believe it was going to be $1,000, and then we're going to have one per kilowatt charge. Through our discussions with PG&E, again, one of the largest FERC payers, we came up with a compromise. What we're doing is because we are recognizing that there's more work on the post-project side, is that we are adjusting that. So we're increasing that per kilowatt charge. We're keeping the base fee the same, and then we're doing more of a minimal increase on the undergoing a license. With all this said, we do understand that there needs to be more analysis done on this. And we've agreed with the utility companies that we'd like to set up a work group, move forward, and have some further discussions about how we can adjust the fees in the future on the FERC program. So the following, the petitions, I'm not going to get into a lot of the detail. I'll highlight each of these changes here, but the following proposed changes, basically, it doesn't cover the fund's deficit, but rather more closely aligns the fees with staff time required to process them. Most of these petition fees have not been increased since fiscal year 2004, 2005, and only cover between 5 to 20% of the actual cost. Additionally, petitions have become significantly more complex, requiring, of course, increased staff time. So most of these, what we're doing is we're adding in, right now, most of them have just a base fee. And so what we're doing is we're adding a base fee plus a component of a per acre foot component to the multiplier, and then adding some maximum fees. So we have a fee for changing our fees for petitions, change petitions, time extension petition fees, our water change petition fee, and the temporary or urgency change petitions involving transfers. Cannabis small irrigation use registrations. At the April 2019 board meeting, the statewide cannabis journal order was amended, which added requirements to the on-stream reservoirs. And so basically what this is doing is it's basically establishing a fee for the on-stream reservoirs. We're also providing a discount. So if you're paying for a cannabis on-stream reservoir fee, which we're setting at initial application fee of $4,750 and then $1,000 annual fee, that you would be eligible to receive a 50% discount for your non-cannabis small irrigation use registration filed with the cannabis small irrigation use registration for that same diversion. And currently the fees on that are $750 and $100 annually. So that's where you'd see a discount there of $375 and $50. Application filing fee initial review, and this is one we've been having discussions with for a while. Basically, all the categories below for the applications, the temporary permit applications, small hydroelectric applications, the temporary permit applications for small hydroelectric, the temporary permit applications to divert to underground storage under high flow events. Right now, we can hold basically $250. So if an application comes in, there's a lot of work. If it doesn't fully go through all the stages for approval process, or it's been rejected or removed, we can keep $250. And just kind of keep in mind, $250 is basically about an hour and a half staff time. And there's definitely, on some of these applications, some of the workload, there's extensive workload that's taking place. So what we're proposing is adding $500 would be the minimum, but then plus, I take that back, not the minimum, but it goes up to $500, but then we're also adding a 10% of the actual application filing fee that can be withheld. And this is kind of just providing us kind of a safeguard to basically capture our cost of this review process. So the next item here, I'll just kind of go through these bullets, but Amanda Montgomery is here to help also assist with this item. The underground storage streamline permitting fee. So our proposal for staff's proposal is to reduce the standard water right application filing fee by 25% for eligible projects. So from the current $1,000 plus $15 per each acre foot greater than 10 acre feet, or the current maximum cap. Reduce the annual fee for eligible projects as follows. Permittees, licensees will pay the permit or license annual fee based on the amount of water actually diverted, or 75% of the standard water right annual fee based on face value, or whichever is greater. And with that said, I'll move it over to Amanda.
Great. I'm going to give a preview of the program that we're talking about here. It's something we're about to release. So the program that we're developing is an expedited pathway through our standard water right application process. And it's to help support the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. So what are we doing? We're going to be offering an expedited pathway through the regular permitting process. We aren't changing any laws or regulations, so the public participation aspects of the water rights process are still fully in place. We know that many of the groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSAs, and their associated local public agencies are looking for sources of water to augment their depleted aquifers. So there may be a number of options for getting that water supply that they're looking for, and many of those options involve us in one way or another. Some examples of new supplies for them could be participating in a water transfer, and we process those, many of those. Some are outside of our bounds. Obtaining contract water, recycled water. We're involved with that with wastewater change petitions. Or perhaps changing an existing right, and if it's a post-1914 water right, that's a change petition for us. But what we mostly hear about when I go out to outreach events is that parties are looking for new sources of supply coming out of our surface waters, and those are going to involve water right permits. So in 2015, we began expediting temporary permits under the governor's drought order that last for 180 days. And there's also a bill that's going before the governor's desk that would give us a 5-year authorization for temporary permits. So those are both important tools if we get the bill through, but the existing 180-day approval, important tools for rapid coverage for pilot projects. But regardless, we expect that GSAs are going to be seeking long-term authorizations because their aquifers are quite depleted and they're going to need long-term injection of additional supplies or their other mechanisms of reducing demand. So we know we're trying to work on a pathway for that standard permit process, thinking farther ahead. And I note that I'm going to talk a little bit about that streamlined pathway, but for parties that don't fit, and some parties won't fit, they can still go through our regular permitting pathway with all of its normal steps. Okay, so now I've built up all the anticipation about the pathway. So why is it going to be faster? So the first reason why it's going to be faster is it's going to focus on low threat diversions. And so the reason why they're going to be low threat is because they're going to have a season that's focused on wintertime, so December to March, when we don't see a lot of our traditional water right holders diverting, and when we don't have the significant fisheries concerns with migration and other needs. So when they are during that wintertime season, the other part is they would have a diversion trigger. So when do they start taking waters out of our streams? These would be projects that would be coming to us for high flows or flood flows, peak flows is another way to say it. So there'd be two choices for diversion trigger. Choice number one would be based on the historic hydrograph and stream gauging. So it has two parts. The first part is when you look at 30 years worth of data for a gauge and you compare that to the point of diversion location. When you look at that 30 years worth of data, you're taking 90% of the hydrograph. And that's kind of a cool trigger because USGS, for the gauges that it has, where it has 30 years worth of data, has it on their website for the gauge in kind of a green and red. Green, it's above 90%, red, it's not. So that's fairly easy for parties to use. And then coupled with that, and that's really focused on protecting our senior right holders because they're diverting at the highest part of the hydrograph where we think their demand is going to be fully satisfied. There's a simplified water availability process that they'll go through to double check that, to add up all the diverters and make sure that's true, but it won't be our normal, very detailed water availability. And we'll have guidance for parties about that process. The other part of the stream flow trigger is that they only take 20% of the total stream flow on that day. And that's about protecting the fisheries resources, that we're not cutting off the hydrograph, we're not flatlining that, we're preserving what their needs. And that comes out of scientific literature from Richter. So that's option number one. It is a little complicated. We think that we'll have guidance on it, and we think it will be relatively easy for people to use. They will have to have a stream gauge at their point of diversion, but there'll be some ability if they have points of diversion in a series where they could monitor the upstream point and have to represent downstream points. Okay, option number two. So option number two is looking at, yesterday I was at a flood or a climate change forum, and they talked a lot about how we're going to see more flooding. And especially in the San Joaquin system, we're going to see a lot more flooding with climate change. We're going to see these big peak flow events because we're going to have a lot more snow melt. Less snow melt, more rainfall. So when they were talking about that, it came to mind this second option that we have, which is that if a flood control agency makes a call that diversion is needed to protect for human health or safety, that could be another trigger for diversion, because that's really where the water should be coming out of the stream anyway. Flood control in and of itself is not a beneficial use, so that's happening in our streams already. But we see a lot of conversations now about multi-benefit and about this idea of having flood control coupled with diversion to storage, which is a good thing, but you start to encounter a need for a water right because you're going to be putting that water into storage and then using it for a beneficial use. Okay, so those are two options. The other reason why the projects will move more quickly is because the applicants will do some upfront work. So they'll basically bring us a project that's ready to move. Because the applicants would be either GSAs or local agencies, they would be the lead for CEQA. So they'd come to us with their CEQA process done. A lot of times in the water rights process, we're waiting for CEQA to be done while it's in our shop, and that takes a long time. And then also they'd be accepting the diversion triggers voluntarily. And that's can be a big time savings. A lot of times, because we don't have in-stream flow objectives or criteria in our streams, we're basically having to go on a case-by-case basis on each of these projects. And so if we can have a criteria that they agree to up front, then we can move forward. So a few other things to point out. One issue that comes up with underground storage and groundwater recharge is beneficial use. So having water just putting it in the aquifer for storage alone is not a beneficial use, but we do have a new fact sheet we produced about 6 months ago that talks about ways to store water in the aquifer, not taking it out, which you might call in situ storage, ways to do that and accomplish the purposes of SGMA. So, there's ways to put water and keep it in there we've done this for many years for water quality control for seawater intrusion, but there's other more creative ideas that we explain in our fact sheet that people could use if they have the documentation to back it up or the approach to back it up with preventing more subsidence. There's other ideas in there. So we're open on that, and that's part of the discussion. Another aspect of our proposal is encouraging umbrella permitting. So that's something we already do with our water rights in a few examples. It's basically where you have an entity that covers a very large area and then authorizes many points of diversion, and those points of diversion can turn on or off. So you see that not in the context of underground storage, but surface water storage, like in the Mendocino area of the Russian River, where Mendocino Russian River flood control has a much longer name. but they have many, many, maybe 80, 90 points of diversion, and they can turn them on and off depending if they're a customer or not. So here, the parallel that we would encourage is a GSA or a local agency that's representing the GSA's participants could cover many, many points of diversion. And then the landowners could decide if they would operate their pumps, if they would participate in on-farm recharge. And that might be a decision that changes year to year, but they wouldn't have to come back to us for a change petition. There would also be benefits of that in terms of their use accounting and their reporting if you have a centralized entity, and also between conflicts. If you get many parties that are getting water rights in the aquifer and to the stream to put water in the aquifer, it's just going to make the accounting for the GSAs very difficult. So we're encouraging that. We can't mandate it, but we can encourage it. Okay. And then when are we going to release this new package? So we're putting in the finishing touches on it, and we're targeting on or around October 2nd. So it's just around the corner, a few weeks away. We'll have a new website. We'll have materials for parties to read and look through. We'll plan events and outreach to roll that out to people. And we've already been going out to events and discussing it, the broad ideas like I'm talking about with you today, but people can get into the details. Okay, that's all I have.
That's a lot. And fantastic. I really appreciate Ms. Montgomery. When it came down to it, I know today you weren't ready to go full live with the full package, but since we're adopting the fee component, I felt it's a nice opportunity to be able to explain to folks, why it is that you see these changes within the fee structures, because they are accompanying these streamlining activities on the regulatory side or the other side. I really look forward to the launch, and I really thank staff for the great work around it. As you noted, GSAs are very much looking for opportunities to take high flow events. We saw, these last couple of years, the discussion around, do we need a beneficial use change? Do you need a new beneficial use in order to accomplish the goals of Sigma? And I really appreciate staff's work as well around the white paper, further explaining to GSAs and folks in all the engagement just what the opportunities and options are. And so thank you. Really appreciate the great work around that.
So one of the final proposals, and this is something that we propose every year, is that we adjust our caps on the water rights applications, change petitions involving the transfer of water pursuant to the following water codes. And we make this adjustment based on the Consumer Price Index that's published by the Department of Industrial Relations. And so the increases here, as you can see, we go from 534,155 to 553,919. And I'm not aware of anyone that actually hits this cap right now. So again, next fiscal year, we continue to monitor the fund. I project, again, as I mentioned in a couple of programs, about a 3 to 6% increase in fees to support, again, our standard increases in employee compensation. However, as we do every year, I will continue to monitor the fund and any potential budget change proposals and provide updates to stakeholders during our stakeholder meeting process. So that concludes the water rights fee item presentation.
Thank you. Any comment from fellow colleagues?
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation, and I echo the comments and very excited about the opportunities with the streamlined underground storage permitting process, and also we'll see on the outcome of the 5-year temporary permit options, but I think just having those additional tools in the toolbox can really provide ways for GSAs to leverage available surface water to help augment and restore aquifers. So I think that's very exciting and exactly what we should be doing. I did want to ask a question about the cannabis fund on the water rights side. I mean, you spoke about the on-stream dams fee, which is understandable. But I was wondering, we had a discussion in an earlier item about waste discharge requirements for cannabis. And so the same question applies here for water rights. What is the status of that fund here?
So this year we have a handful of vacancies. I think it's 4 or 5 in the water rights cannabis program. If we keep those vacancies open, we are fine revenue versus expenditures. Most of the water rights cannabis fund is funded through the equivalent of the general fund or the cannabis tax fund. And there's only 4 or 5 or maybe 6 positions that are funded through our fees. So on the fee-funded side, we're finally up to the point where our revenues are more or less equaling our expenditures. So the whole, and I did want to say, the whole budget development process is obviously confidential. We are in that this year for the governor's next budget. But if you remember 3 years ago when we got our initial cannabis program, and I think it was actually in the BCP, that we only received 3-year funding but permanent positions. And I think it actually said in the BCP that it was the administration's intent. Why they did that was they wanted to revisit that whole program, and this isn't just our agency, it's 2 or 3 others that are related to cannabis, to see how it's actually rolling out. So I can't say whether or not there will be a BCP this year, but if you have permanent positions and 3-year funding, which is running out this year, you can connect the dots and say that there is some major discrepancy that the administration has to address. So I'll leave it at that.
Any other comment before I go to public comments? I'll call up Adam Robin from the Northern California Water Association, who will be followed by Bob Gore and Guelco Group. And if there's anyone else wishing to speak, please do get your cards to Janine.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Mr. Chair and board members. Adam Robin with the Northern California Water Association. Really appreciate this opportunity to provide comments on the proposed revisions to the water rights fee schedule for this next year. I want to begin by thanking staff, both DAS staff and program staff. We do appreciate the really robust stakeholder process. We appreciate their responsiveness generally and specifically, and it's something that John Russell mentioned earlier, the incorporation of program staff into these meetings is particularly helpful when we get into the details as to what the proposed fee changes actually relate to at a program level. So on the item before you today, we do support option number 4. I'm still calling it that, but it's the staff proposal, which limits to the greatest extent possible the per acre fee increase for this year. It's still a substantial increase, some 16%, but of the options presented, it was the lowest, and we think that reflects most closely that nexus that we're looking for, which is a fair and reasonable relationship to the burden imposed on the program. Moving forward, we do encourage the Water Rights Fund. We're very open to discussing and looking for ways for the Water Rights Fund to be financed in a manner that really reflects the full scope of program beneficiaries. Like the Water Board's mission, a lot of folks benefit from the Water Rights program. We do support increased general fund allocations to support the Water Rights Fund. Obviously, that's a conversation that goes beyond this room and involves the legislature, but it's something we're very interested in, particularly in situations, and we think we might see a few of these coming down the line, where proposed one-time or limited term fee increases might be financed in part through the Water Rights Fund. As I said, that's obviously a broader conversation, but it's one we look forward to engaging in. Anticipating that the Water Rights Program will remain largely fee-supported into the near future, we do appreciate a continued focus on accounting how the various moving parts, account for time, effort, energy of staff. That information is really foundational for us as stakeholders as we engage in the stakeholder process, understanding what's being done where and what type of resources are being dedicated to different purposes. And we think that's especially important for new program elements. For example, the new Administrative Hearings Office is going to be coming online this year, and just understanding where that program is dedicating its energies is going to be really important for us moving forward. So in closing, we appreciate the board's action today, or anticipated action. We appreciate the continued engagement by the board and staff, and thank you for this opportunity to provide comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gore.
Good afternoon. We support our colleague from NACWA entirely, every word he said. We'll need recharge clarity going forward. As everyone knows, it's a central tenet of future water management and a number of initiatives we all know about, especially for rights and uses and process. Eric and Amanda are well aware of this, and we're working with them, and we appreciate it. The general manager of a large irrigation district had a good anecdote for us all when he mentioned to me that recharge isn't as simple as it appears. We have to build a whole new irrigation district on top of the old one. We need new intakes to handle floodwater flows. We need new dispersion systems. We need new recharge fields. So associated with that is genuine incentives with permitting. We can be a lot more aggressive, a lot more robust, and we'll work together to encourage recharge. This is much more complex than I think we realize. The annual review of petition fees is necessary, and I hope we stick to that. The fee increase is daunting but doable. It's doubly daunting when 6% was predicted a year ago. And then lastly, with results and metrics, in 2016-17, there was a BCP approved for water rights permitting and licensing augmentation. And we've had a partial accounting, but never a thorough one. The BCP establishes a number of handy metrics. As of 2015, it told the legislature the current backlog is 14 years for appropriative water right permits, 9 years for registration, 8 years for petitions and wastewater changes, 44 years, my personal favorite, for licensing water rights permits. And then it goes on to say, approving this BCP will, and I quote, directly increase water storage capacity in the state and authorizes new diversion of water. It would be good to get a specific update on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. Any further comment or discussion from fellow board members? We'll entertain a motion then.
Well, I just want to say in response to Mr. Gore's comments, and I think it follows in line with our discussion of performance metrics and accountability, and I am very sympathetic to the times and the significant backlog that exists in water rights, having worked there once myself. I'm very familiar with those timeframes. And so I know, Ms. Montgomery, you've also provided some updates to Mr. Gore in the past, so I would ask that if we could take another look at that and look at providing him some more, additional information to answer his questions, that would be appreciated.
Sure, we can do that.
On that, and I know there was also a comment to look at a different fee option, but as proposed by staff, I'm very comfortable with the staff recommendations for the changes today, so I will move to adopt item 12.
Sorry, clarification, item 13.
Item 13, sorry.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Carries. And item 13 is adopted. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff, for the great work as always, and look forward to next year's fee adoption meeting. All right, well, that leaves our last couple of items. We have board member reports. Any fellow colleagues like to report anything particularly interesting? Member Dodek had a great vacation. She was in the Galapagos and in Peru. It's kind of hard to beat that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, as you all are figuring out what. So I have had a lot of fun and learned a lot from, I think, 4 different regional meetings around, well, actually more than that, but around 4 different areas in the state around the executive order for resiliency and the new Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and how that fits into our broader Safe and Affordable Drinking Water program in Visalia, Madera County, Los Angeles, especially both the Simi Valley Regional Board meeting and also the South LA stakeholder and tour, and I know board member McGuire was part of that, and I found that extremely helpful to be able to get a better sense, get a better sense from of seeing challenges down there, being able to talk more closely with district office staff from Division of Drinking Water and connecting the regional board and state board staff, I just really enjoyed. And I think it was really helpful to start engaging more with some of the local stakeholders that are not the usual suspects with drinking water issues down there. And then tomorrow, I get to go with staff to Coachella and to Palm Desert and Thermal, to be more precise, to do similar, same type of deal. Really helpful. I've also just really enjoyed it. It's a chance to connect with people about what we're doing and get their ideas and questions. And I find it so nice to be able to connect regional board and state board staff with together in this work, being able to see that more. I know a lot of folks are working together, but being able to see that's really nice. Got a tour of Santa Monica Bay issues, which I hadn't ever gotten a tour before, even though I grew up kind of near there. So got more of a history and also a look to the future about those projects coming and that have been being developed. Got to get a tour in Anaheim of the water recycling facility, the demonstration facility that's right next to City Hall. It's pretty cool. That's like they had to be very sure that the odor issues were addressed because all of the city council members are walking and staff are walking right by there every day. So it was a bold decision to put it right there, and I think reflective of Orange County water reuse and recycling leadership. So got to meet with folks there. And then the last activity item I wanted to mention is state board staff have been collaborating with DWR and stakeholders as part of this county drought advisory group, which is developing recommendations for small and rural communities for drought and water contingency planning. That is progressing well, and there's, I think one of the things I've appreciated about that process, and especially recent meetings, has been that they're really looking at not reinventing whole new plans and sort of bureaucratic processes that somebody needs to pay to develop and then pay to oversee, but are trying to fit it into existing data collection, planning, and reporting processes that we either have at the board for small systems or think about how we get for these communities that that the water board doesn't regulate, and how that fits into our also broader discussions around risk factors for small systems for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, because in addition to safety, there's also the need to actually have water coming out of the tap to have safe and affordable drinking water. So I'm really excited about that process. It also fits so perfectly into the priorities around resiliency that everyone's working hard around. So I hope to make sure that we integrate that all into the reports and recommendations that are delivered to the governor. And that particular section of our population is often left out of planning processes and is really a gap. And so I think is a big opportunity to make sure that doesn't happen going forward. And then lastly, Sean and I got confirmed in the last 2 weeks. So that was great.
So have at it, say what you want. Actually.
For the next 3-4 months.
Sean inevitably gets to go through it again in a few months here, but.
Okay, well, thank you. So yes, I was looking at what I have been doing, and the answer is lots of stakeholder meetings. But a couple things I wanted to highlight are, a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to I was invited by Civiqua to go to a workshop on the ELAP recommendations and their proposal for the California QMS alternative. And so I just want to say that it was a very well attended meeting. There was a lot of interest in the California QMS option. And so, I know that that's, those regulations are still in development. And so, to the extent that, stakeholders are still engaged in this conversation, I'm looking forward to continuing to work on that, as we go forward here with that process. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is, yes, I've been greatly enjoying the discussions on the water resilience portfolio. Last week, Laurel and I were both at the Los Angeles Regional Board meeting, and I think it was a good format. We had an outstanding panel of speakers, ranging from the City of Los Angeles, Metropolitan Water District, WRD, LA Waterkeeper, and a number of Ventura County, a number of others commented. And so just hearing the variety of perspectives from Southern California, from specifically Los Angeles and Ventura, and really, highlighting a lot of the investments they have made in building water resilience and diversified portfolios, and also a lot of the work that they still have to do. Tim DeFetta was there, is the general manager, the manager of the Hyperion. Yes, and so just highlighting, both Liz Crossan was there with the city of LA, and Tim, and they both spoke to the goal to go to zero discharge at the Hyperion wastewater treatment plant by 2035. All ambitious goals, but very noble efforts. And then, yes, the next day, having the opportunity to go on a tour of urban disadvantaged communities, to be able to see the Sativa water system and experience a lot of the work that LA County has been doing there, and hearing from Russ Bryden. I know I missed his presentation during the Administrator Handbook initial draft presentation, but I was able to basically, I think, see his presentation last week. And then also we went to the site where he's actually been spending a lot of his life and over the past year.
I saw the tweet. Very nice.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, that was, we walked into that one. But it was actually really great to see how much they've been able to accomplish, and for me, very humbling to think that what they spent the last year dealing with was a secondary drinking water standard. It was a manganese, a color issue, and not a primary drinking water standard issue. So I'm very happy that we were able to adopt the Administrator Handbook. Obviously, with SB 200, we have a big challenge before us. Just going through some of the communities there and learning about how just the public perception about the safety of drinking water and the reluctance of the community members to even drink the water that's there, even if there is assurance that it is safe to drink. I saw it, and so that was one of the first times actually I've had the opportunity to experience that in that close proximity, and so I have a much finer appreciation for some of those issues. So I really appreciated that visit. I did want to mention, I think I mentioned this yesterday, but on Monday we're having, you mentioned the small, the work group on small communities and preparing for droughts. We're having a similar discussion on Monday about larger groups, all the state, and our preparation, readiness for droughts in light of the water resilience portfolio. And so I think that's obviously small communities and how those are factored in are a key aspect of that. So I look forward to having that included in the conversation on Monday. And then just a heads up, on the 30th, so the following Monday, I am going to be attending the PPIC water research meeting, and that too is an item on the water resilience portfolios. And so it'll be, again, I think a good discussion there about research needs, filling data gaps, and actions. Nancy Vogel will be there as well on the same panel, and Eric Ekdahl will be there. So again, looking forward to that, and also seeing what comes of the portfolio here in the coming weeks.
Thank you, board member. Oh, quickly, let's see. So since our last board meeting, I kind of went on a little bit of a blitz of kind of speaking engagements, insofar as on the 29th, I spoke at the, oh no, sorry, I'm going to go back even further. So on the 22nd, I spoke at the Water Data Summit here at UC Davis. It was put on by the California Data Collaborative. Wade Crowfoot was there as well. It was a great gathering and a really good discussion. We talked about ABC 1755, the partner agency team, and the Open Water Data Transparency Act, and then now this consortium that's been developed on the outside that includes Metropolitan Water District, includes a lot of nonprofits, and is creating this space for outside folks to invest in really the sort of the standards that we can start to develop, to allow interoperability between data sets basically within the state of California. And that's connecting, as you know, to the Internet of Water discussion that is an outgrowth of the Aspen Institute. So there's all these sort of great ways that, there at the conference we're able to speak about one, and also New Mexico recently passed their own water data transparency law that is modeled after ours. And it was actually Melanie Stansberry, who I worked with in DC when she was at Senate Natural Resources. And it was a nice opportunity. The next day, I was down in San Diego then, speaking at the California Association of Sanitation Agencies yearly conference. Obviously ELAP came up in that context as well, but it was a good opportunity to engage with folks. The next week on Monday, I was actually with Board Member Firestone at the 10th anniversary of the Orange County chapter of Water Reuse's little celebration, and that was yet another good opportunity to talk about water recycling. And I believe you went on a tour actually of Anaheim's water recycling facility, which is there in the neighborhood. I then, on the 29th, spoke at Sustain Southern California's Water Solutions 4 conference, which Jeff Keitlinger was there also as well, and it was all about kind of the innovative space around water, and that's it, if that were not enough, I guess. So yeah, it's been a productive few weeks here, I think, for all of us, even those of us that were in Galapagos, which is some of the best productivity that you can get in.
Actually, I do have one thing to report. The San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board at their meeting last week, all the weeks run together in my mind now, did have a discussion on the water resiliency portfolio. And Karen Mogus, our deputy director, made the presentation, and regional board lined up panels of speakers and spoke a lot about, sea level rise and the work that they're doing in the San Francisco Bay region to help that. So there was a lot of good input there. And I also want to do a shout out, since all 4 of us, I think, live in Sacramento. This Saturday, if you're in town, is the Great American River Cleanup Day, sponsored by the American River Parkway Foundation. It's from 9 to noon, and they do this every 3rd Saturday in September. And I think last year, well over 1,000 people volunteered to help pick up trash along the American River Parkway. So if you're in town, come out. It's fun, and it's a really beautiful, beautiful parkway. And you all have done the tour there, right? So just want to give them a shout out for the good work that they do.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. As someone who uses the parkway frequently, and I have participated in that in the past, I will definitely be out there. I was just floating on the American River last Saturday, so I best get back out.
Actually,
and
there
start
is an
cleanup.
option to do on-river trash
cleanup?
pickup as well, if you have kayak or, stand-up paddle boards or canoe.
We have a stand-up.
There you go.
Wow. Now I know what, yeah, let's all go
Inspired.
float down the river and clean it together.
Yes.
That sounds good.
Except we can't do it as a board and discuss
Yes,
board
we can.
activities.
Well, we can do social activities that don't, but it's best
long
not
as we're
to.
not
It's best not to even get into that realm, and so we stay away from each other. When we see each other, 3 of us we go across the street. No one makes eye contact. It's fine. I think now we can.
I just had
Yeah.
one question to flag for us to think about. I feel like this is an opportunity not just to talk about what we've done the last bit, but other issues that have come up. I feel like I've heard from a number of people now concerns about how PFAS is changing the calculation and dynamics for recycling, reuse, and other reuse activities because of potential kind of recontamination once you're putting things in groundwater. You know, I think we've heard a lot in LA about the need for direct potable reuse or regulations to be moving forward. And so I don't think, I'm not asking to discuss this right now, but I just wanted to flag, not in the immediate future, but just for maybe future agenda items to, I think it's been a while since we had a PFAS update at the board information item, but I'm not sure exactly how we would structure it, but I see that as a changing dynamic and an issue of concern that continues to come up. And I know our programs are collecting more information on PFAS and that we've done some recent changes and asked for public health goals. So I just, in the future, look forward to having an information item and discussion on that.
Yeah, I think we're definitely due for an update from our last workshop, given a lot of movement, I think, that's happened since then, certainly. And continues to move quickly, to your point, board member. And I've heard concern as well. I will say, as I understand, you know, for more discussion, but reverse osmosis looks like it's pulling it, so, but still, yeah.
So there is concern where they have lower levels of treatment because it passes through low-level treatments, and so that's an issue.
Good flag. Anything else from, board member, or executive report? Is there anything you'd like to flag, executive director?
No, I'm good.
Then I think, so technically, we're just recessing until Friday morning when we will reconvene because we have a quorum and we will be at Leviathan Mine touring about. So, I'm not closing us off. I'm putting us into recess. This meeting has not ended. It will simply pick back up Friday morning in Leviathan Mine at a Superfund site of all places, of course. All right. Thank you, everyone. Great board meeting. Really appreciate it. And we will see you soon, Friday morning.